Welcome to Complete Intro to Motion Design, where you'll learn everything you need to know to get started in the world of motion graphics. Let's do it.
TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut. Today we are taking our first steps on our journey into complete motion design, or a complete intro to motion design. You've seen in the header there, the intro, that the thing we're going to be animating is this little lighter character in the forest. This is something that I've drawn in Procreate on the iPad. But as far as you're concerned, you can start with a sketch on paper. It doesn't really matter. We're going to take this in a series of videos from conceptual sketch all the way through to a completed animated piece inside of After Effects. Now, the first thing I did when I got started was to draw some little concepts down, and you can see here that eventually I decided on this sort of lighter character toasting a marshmallow on his own flame, and I took that into Procreate and I just did a little sketch of that. I actually did do a complete finished version in Procreate just to see what that was going to look like and to see whether I would enjoy it and want to work with it, which I decided I did. So you'll be able to download this from my website, but if you want to, you can absolutely do this with your own sketch, your own drawing as well. It can be whatever you want, and I do highly recommend you do that. So that's enough preamble. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little time lapse of me doing the sketch, and let's jump right into the first step, which, as you saw in the title card, is sketching and illustration. We've done the sketching, it's time for the illustration. So here we are inside Illustrator. I've just booted up Illustrator here, it'll be on the home page. And as you can see from my assets folder that I've got here, I have my original sketch, and I also have the an example of the finished artwork here, which I created in Procreate. This is the thing that we're going to be recreating step by step, because I don't want to just do a Procreate tutorial. I want to assume you guys don't have access to that. So all I've done is I've just taken my sketch layer that I'm going to be bringing into Illustrator, and we're going to rebuild that in Illustrator. So I'm going to drag and drop my sketch.png into Illustrator, and that's going to create a file for us here. Now, just for my peace of mind, what I'm going to do is grab my artboard tool, and I'm just going to increase my artboard to the size of my artwork, like so. That gives us 2048 pixels to work with, which is quite a large amount. Now, if you're very new to Illustrator and you're very new to sort of this sort of stuff in general, then I'd recommend that you watch my Intro to Illustrator series, which I'll link in the video now. That'll just get you to grips with using Illustrator and using this software, which I will explain a little bit, but not in a tremendous amount of detail because there's so much to get through anyway. So without any further ado, let's jump in. So we're going to build this in a way that will allow us to take it first into Photoshop and then secondly into After Effects. And what that means is we have to work quite carefully with our layers palette down here. What I will do is I'll just shift myself for this video, the little camera version of me. I'm going to go and bring me over here to this side, just because our layers palette is down there and we need to know what buttons I'm clicking. So to bring this sort of thing into After Effects, what you need to do is make sure that all of your content that you want to be separate needs to be on separate layers. So the first thing we should do is create a bunch of layers. Now, creating groups inside these layers is fine, but it won't be interpreted as editable when you bring it into Photoshop. So you need to make sure that all your separate assets are on your separate layers. Secondly, I'm going to be using a brilliant color palette by Gigantic. Again, I will link him now. And Gigantic is a brilliant illustrator, and he gives this color palette away for free on his website, and I just think it's fantastic. I use it for a lot of my stuff. So we're just going to pop that out there just for reference as well. You can grab that from his website if you go and download it. So I'm going to take this sketch here, okay? And the first thing I'm going to do is drag that layer to the top of the screen, and I'm going to rename it Sketch because naming things is important. And then I'm also going to twirl this down, and I'm going to change its opacity. I don't like this setup. I've just bought a new PC, so my setup isn't complete yet. I'm going to drag my layers palette under my properties palette, just so I've got these options separate. When I select the sketch layer, I'm going to drop its opacity down so we can start to see through it. It's just a reference. I'm also going to lock it so I can't accidentally select it, and twirl it down again so it's not too distracting. Okay, so let's take a look at our files here. Now I'm just going to bring this other one up for reference, just on the other screen, and we're going to crack right on. So first things first, in Illustrator, we're only making the flat colors. We're going to add all of this like sort of nice gradient stuff here that you've seen in Photoshop and then eventually After Effects. So first things first, we're going to work from the bottom up. We're going to make sure we have our bottom layer selected and we're going to call this sky. Then we're just going to draw a box with our rectangle tool and using our grab handles here, we're just going to make that fill our canvas. And then I'm just going to drag it up to about that size because I know that's where the sky stops and that's all we really need to see. I'm just going to pop a basic blue color from my palette there. And I did that just by hitting I for the eyedropper and clicking on the palette. Okay. Separately to this sky, we're going to add texture to it and some lines, but we're probably going to add all these lines in After Effects later. However, we will do them on the same layer here and we'll call them sky lines. Whilst these will probably be rebuilt, I'm going to build them here quickly. I'm not going to worry too much about how they look. I'm just going to grab the blob brush tool that I've got here, boom, 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 like so. Make sure that I'm happy with it. And I'm going to grab a nice dark blue. And using my blob brush tool, I'm just going to bring some of these lines in that we have from that original. Just using the mouse. Like I said, we're going to be rebuilding these. So accuracy isn't too important. Just as long as you're happy with the way they look roughly. Okay, perfect. That's the sky done, so I'm going to hide those layers. Next up is the moon. So we need moon. And we'll need a layer for moon lines. And probably what I will be doing is bringing sort of this reference file into After Effects anyway. So we've got those original lines on there. So the moon is a circle. We'll grab our ellipse tool here and holding Alt and Shift, we'll just click and drag until we get the rough size that we want. And then pressing I, we can select a nice moon color. That one seems to work. We're going to add quite a bit of shading to this along the bottom and highlighting and also some lines along there as well. So I did accidentally just draw that on moon lines though. So I'll cut that with Control X and I'll select my moons layer and I'll paste it in place with Control F. On top of that, we'll go to the moon lines layer. We'll grab our slightly darker color here. We'll go Shift B to bring up our blob brush again. And we'll just draw in some rough lines. Again, just for reference, because we're going to be redoing those. So don't worry if they look a bit messy. We will, however, grab all of these shapes, and this is the reason we do it with the blob brush. And we will copy the moon on top. So Control C on that moon, go to the moon lines layer, Control F, and that will paste it on top of these lines. Now, if we Shift select all 4 of these lines, we can do right click and then make compound path. And that tells Illustrator to treat these as a single shape, meaning when we select this moon that's on top and we select these lines that are underneath and we bring up Pathfinder in our properties palette, we can choose intersect and that will retain only the intersecting sections. And when you reapply the color, you'll be able to see, there you go. We've got the lines now cut off to the shape of our moon, which is really helpful. Okay, so what is next then? Next up is creating the mountains. So we'll do that there. Mountains layer here. And then I'm pretty sure there's some lines on those too. So we'll just bring up mountains lines. And we'll just start to bring these in. Now, because this is a really rough sketch, what we're going to do is just use the pen tool on our mountains layer. And we're going to choose sort of this nice dark green color, making sure that it looks good against our sky. So we'll turn our sky back on briefly. And grab our pen tool. And if you long press on the pen tool, it should bring up some other options. Oops, sorry, not the pen tool. Beneath it, the pen tool, there is the curvature tool. It used to be under the pen. And what this does is it allows you to work with like the pen tool by clicking, but just clicking around and it will automatically adjust and create the curves for you, which you might find quite useful. So I'm going to select this nice dark color here. And with my curvature tool, I'm going to zoom in. And I'm just going to start trying to draw in a nice mountain shape. Like that, maybe. And what this does is it ensures that the lines you do have are really smooth. Now, this is going to be hidden behind the others. So I'm just going to grab my normal pen tool now, select that anchor point, and I'm just going to square off this little mountain. Okay, that's good. On that, there are some darker lines. So we'll do the same thing we did with the moon. We'll go onto the mountain lines layer. We'll grab our brush tool with Shift B. We'll zoom in using Control Plus there, and we'll just start drawing in some reference lines. Seems good to me. Again, these are going to be removed in the final thing and reapplied in After Effects. So we're not spending a lot of time on them. I'm going to grab all 6 of these and make them a compound path. We'll copy and paste in place on the mountain lines layer. The other mountain, we'll choose intersect and we'll reapply that dark color. And there is our first mountain in the background there. So now we need to start looking at drawing the actual foreground. So that'll be on top. We'll just call this foreground. And then there'll be some lines on that. So that'll be foreground lines. And on our foreground layer, we'll select this nice dark blue here. And again, with our curvature tool, we're just going to dive right in. So there's a little bit of a lump, a little bit of a hill here. So we'll just make sure to include that. Starts to curve back down again before it comes up. I'm not worrying too much about following the sketch incredibly accurately because it's a sketch and we can neaten things up to our heart's desire. Now this one comes all the way down, so we're going to fill the canvas with that. Pressing V there to bring up the selection tool, and we've got our mountain. So let's grab our foreground lines. We'll make that in this nice dark color. Shift B to bring up the blob brush, and I'm pretty sure I just did a couple sort of along there like that. Again, not worrying too much because we're going to be replacing these. They're just there for reference. Okay, good. Let's select both of those, right click, make compound path, copy the foreground underneath, paste it in place with Control F on the foreground layer, select the lines, choose intersect from the Pathfinder menu and reapply that dark color. There we go. So that's pretty much the process for this entire section. So I'm just going to focus a bit more now on building this character because he's got more intricacies to him, if that makes sense. So we'll build the foreground quickly and then we'll build the character after that. So I'm going to go to the top here and I'm going to put a layer for trees. And I'm just going to quickly, with the pen tool this time, because I need that bit of lumpiness to it, I'm just going to start to draw in these trees. Again, from the sketch here, being quite rough. And if you click, it will create an angled point, like so. But if you click and drag, it will create a curved point, which is quite useful. So I'm just doing quick little drags here, just to create a bumpy but still curved main line. And then we'll go up to the top. Now, what I'm probably going to do at the end, thinking about all these lines here, is I'm going to go back through with my graphics tablet and I'm going to neaten them up. But if you don't have access to that, you could do these lines in the same way that I'm doing these pen tools. You can see in our original sketch here, excuse me, if I go and zoom in a little bit, you can see that they differ in thickness a little bit. They differ in sort of angle. So what you could do instead of just drawing a flat line is you could grab your pen tool. You could start drawing in some curves like so. And then if you hold Alt, you can adjust a single axis point here. And what that will allow you to do is go back on yourself. Oops. And start to follow around like so. I just wanted to show you a way to create these without a graphics tablet, which doesn't have obviously pressure sensitivity. But I'll be going through and I'll be creating these again with a graphics tablet that does have pressure sensitivity just because it's quicker for me. So that's how you'd recreate those lines. That's why I'm doing them so roughly. So we've got our tree here. It looks a little bit janky to me though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to choose simplify. What that's going to do is it's just going to even out by removing some of these points here. It's just going to even out some of those sections. Reduce to 25 points. That's just going to smooth out some of those jagged edges there. Do the same thing for this tree on the other side then. We'll keep this on the same layer. And I'm just clicking around here, clicking and dragging, clicking by itself, just to get the edges of these trees in. Okay, looking pretty good. That's not bad. We'll just extend that a little bit further than we need to, just to make sure that it fills the page. And we'll cut out this little section. Nice. There we go. So those are our front trees. They will also have lines on them. If I remember correctly, I closed my reference image, so we'll just reopen that back up. Yep, these have got lines all over them. So we'll just add in some guidelines there. Trees, lines. However, for these two trees, we're going to have to make those a compound path so that we can copy and paste them. We're going to grab our tree lines layer from over here. We're going to grab a lighter color this time, I think it is. I think it's actually this same purplish blue here. And we're just going to start drawing in some lines with our blob brush. Like so. There's one like here-ish. There's one about there. There's a couple that swim down like that. Some down here. And a couple of big sweepers. Like that. Nice. Then over here we've got some stuff. Again, being very rough here because I'm going to redo them. Just for reference. Draw that guy in. Couple up here. Swinging around. Boop, boop. Nice. That looks pretty good. So for simplicity here, I'm just going to click this little dot next to the layer, which selects everything on that layer. Right click, make compound path. I'm going to grab my trees with Control C, paste them on the tree lines layer with Control F. Select both, right click. Sorry, not right click, go to Pathfinder, choose intersect. And then we've got our intersecting shapes that we will grab the color for here. And there we go. We've got our lines. Looking pretty good. Let's quickly do these plants and then we'll work on to the character here. So we need to move some of these layers above tree lines. Actually, these can stay below, I think. We'll call this one vines. And luckily, these don't really have any textures on them. So we can literally just grab our pen tool, like so. And I'm just going to click and drag here until that guy lines up. And then bring that option up here with a single click. Another single click creates another harsh edge. And then a click and drag here creates that vine. So this is the technique you'd use to create these lines if you didn't have a graphics tablet. There is one of our vines. Looks pretty good. Just going to hide some of these background layers so they don't get too distracting here. Grab all these guys off, maybe even turn off the trees and the trees lines. Draw these ones over here. With the pen tool, again, single click, click and drag at the bottom of that apex, dragging around until you get the line that you want. Single click again, adjustment there. Dragging up. Now here you can see that I need to go way past in order to get the line that I want. That's fine, because we can just connect that there. And then we can draw a rectangle just to cut off this little section. Select both shapes and choose minus front. And that will cut that off for us nice and simply. So let's duplicate this one. Actually, let's just draw it again because it will shrink if we duplicate it. So we will grab our second vine, clicking and dragging. And then here I'm going to hold Alt to create that nice sharp right angle. Got our vine there and connecting it up like so. Cool. Those vines look pretty good. So I'm just going to, on the same layer, choose my curvature, my blob brush tool. And I'm going to see if I can paint these in. If I make these a little bit smaller. Does that look all right? That doesn't look too bad, actually. So I'm just going to Good thing about this style of artwork is that it is quite wobbly, so it doesn't really matter if it looks wobbly. So like a hand-drawn illustration style. Looks pretty good. Remembering, of course, these endpoints are going to be behind the tree line, so that's totally fine. And there we have our vines. Let's turn all these layers back on. Like so. Boom, looking pretty good. If we hide our sketch briefly, we can see what we've got going on here. Looking not too bad so far, actually. Let's grab, however, our spare layer and add a few more, because we haven't even done our character yet, and we haven't even done our plants yet. So we're going to do the plants down here by selecting layer 9. I'm going to call this one Plant Base. Turn our sketch back on. And we're going to start to draw these little plants. Now, I am going to hide these tree layers, and I'm going to draw a bit behind them, because when we come to animate this, we might expose this area a little bit. And whilst there's nothing in this area now, there might be later. So we'll start off with our smaller plant here. What I'm going to do is just draw the rough shape that I want for the leaf. I'm going to hold Alt to shorten this handle here so that I can more easily get the shape that I want. I'm going to drag these handles around and boom. There is our leaf shape. I'm going to make sure that this line turns to a fill, and I'm going to make this a nice bright red and press V to come out of that shape. Now, here's the fun bit. Let's duplicate this by holding Alt and Shift, right-clicking it using Transform and Reflect. We want Reflect vertically to flop that around there. And we're just then going to grab this guy and rotate him a little bit to bring him down. Like so. Now, you might want these all on separate layers, just so you can grade them individually. So what I'm going to do is cut that, and I'm going to rename this one Leaf. And on the layer above it, I'm going to paste in place Leaf 2. Then I'm going to grab my pen tool again on the layer above, and we're going to draw this leaf. And guess what we're going to call that one? It's going to be Leaf 3. Bam. Cool. Now we just need to cut out these little sections here. And for that, I'm going to do it really simply. I'm going to grab my pen tool again. I'm going to draw a shape holding Alt there to change the angle. And I'm just going to draw a bunch of triangles that make the cutouts that I want. So we're just going to bring this guy in like that, bring him around. This guy we're going to bring in, bring that around. There we go. Then I'm going to grab my leaf layer, I'm going to grab one of my triangles, and I'm just going to hit minus front. And I'm going to do that again a few more times. Oops. I'm going to grab all of these, cut them, and paste them in place again. And that then makes sure they're all on top, so that when I do grab both of these and hit minus front, it actually minuses the triangle. Control X, Control F, cut. Control X, Control F, Shift, cut. And there we have one of our leaves. So this one, I want the cuts to be in a slightly different place, which is why I'm not duplicating it. I'm going to make sure that I'm still on the correct layer. Oops, that one is not. So we'll cut that one. We'll pop that on its own layer down there. And just for simplicity, we'll actually hide those other ones for now. Make sure we're on the right layer here. Grab that pen tool. Holding Alt to change the angle. Pressing V to come out of it and P to go back in. Holding Alt. And cutting out these shapes by selecting both, minus front. Selecting both, minus front. Good. Let's do this bottom leaf quickly. There's only one cut out here, luckily. Otherwise, we'd be here all day. And we'll cut out that one as well. Perfect. Take a look at them. And there we have our 3 leaves. Again, a lot of the shading that you see here is all going to be applied in a later section in Photoshop, so we don't have to worry about that for now. On top of these then, we're going to need these 2 stalks. So we'll make a layer for stalks, which we will spell correctly. And we're just going to use our blob brush. Shift and B brings up the blob brush. Make sure we're on the right color. So I'm going to grab this sort of dark red color from up here. And I'm just going to draw a nice smooth line. Oop. Nice smooth couple of lines here. Then I'm going to grab my rounded rectangle tool by going to the rectangle here. I'm going to draw the rough shape that I want for the head. And then there's these little circles that I can just drag in and it creates a perfect rounded rectangle. So if I invert that to show a fill, I can start placing these wherever my little heart desires. Every plant needs a friend, so we're going to make ourselves a bigger friend. To do so, I'm just going to grab all these layers like this, and I'm going to duplicate them. Bam. Then I can grab them again and move them over here. I will, however, because it's behind it, grab all these copies and just drag them below like that. Now we can scale this up. Just saves us a little bit of time. Oops, excuse me. Grab the wrong layer there. Position that in place. Looks pretty good. Let's just rotate it a little bit. Oops, I misclicked again there. Rotate those a little bit, just so they're not exactly the same. We'll have to come back into these rounded rectangles and make sure that they're still fully converted like that. And we'll paste the third one in here as well, since the original design had 3. And we'll grab our blob brush and we'll just draw in that final stalk. Oops, we'll make that final stalk the same thickness as the rest. Just pressing open and close square bracket there to shrink or grow this little preview option. Okay. We will quickly re-enable those trees. And we will quickly recolor these leaves because in the original one, it was like a purplish color, not a reddish color. So we'll grab like this kind of nice purple here. We'll leave these the same color though. I think that looks good. And we'll briefly turn off the sketch to see where we are. So that's everything except for the character done. Now, this is already going to be a long video. It's already half an hour long, but I think it's important that we do all of this step in one video for you guys so it's easy to consume. Feel free to pause and come back at another time, but we're just going to crack on and create this character now. Because we've done all of the background setup, we now just need to do this guy, and this guy is going to be a little bit more complicated, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I'm going to take a sip of tea, and we're going to carry on. Okay, so we're going to grab our sketch layer here, make sure that's still on top, and we're going to start drawing our little dude. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure, first of all, I'm going to name this layer palette. And I'm going to make sure that my character, because he doesn't actually touch anything else in the scene at the moment, I'm going to pop him on top just for simplicity here. But when you're done, you're going to want to drag him back down so that he's at least below the trees layer, so that when we come to animate it later on, he's in the right place. What I'm going to do, however, is grab all of these layers we haven't used yet, and I'm just going to pop them right at the top, just so that I know that I can sort of ignore everything underneath the palette layer for now. Right, let's get started then. So we're going to draw the trunk he's sitting on first. We're going to need a layer for the trunk, and we'll probably need a layer for the trunk's shadow as a separate thing. So we'll call this guy trunk shadow, and we'll just get cracking. Now this consists of a few shapes, but I'm just going to pop them all in the same layer because I know I'm not really going to need to shade them any differently. So we'll just do that now. I have a bit of a guesstimate there as to what that trunk's line is behind him, but that's okay. It's a straight line, doesn't matter because we're not going to see it anyway. So I'm just using the same techniques we did before here. Just going to zoom in and make sure I get this guy looking somewhat good. Dragging and clicking. And as you can see, I'm sort of just feeling it out. It might not be exactly the same as the original sketch, but that's okay because it is a sketch. Bam, that looks pretty good to me, apart from it's wildly the wrong color. So we'll just grab this nice sort of turquoise looking color here, and we'll leave it at that. Now we need our little ends here. So we're just going to grab on the same layer, grab a pen tool, and we're just going to create a new shape, making sure nothing's selected. We're just going to sort of roughly line out what we've got going on. Holding Control there to edit an existing point. And then holding Alt to just edit one branch off that existing point. Then copy with Control C, paste with Control F, select both, choose intersect, and I can now choose my darker color for the end of the log there. Cool, looks pretty good. We know that it's overlapping. And for this one, we can just grab a little ellipse and rotate it so that it lines up with the edges here. And that's it. So there is the log. We're happy with that. We do need to add some log lines, however. So we'll do that now. Trunk lines, not trunk lines, trunk lines. These are brighter colors. So we'll do that now. We'll grab our nice bright green here. We'll grab our blob brush and we'll start to just, oops. Well, first of all, make sure it's not that fat. We'll just shrink it down to the same size over here. Again, we'll probably be redoing these. So just going to pop them in quickly for reference. Like so. Grab all of them by selecting the trunk lines layer, probably the easiest way. Right click, compound path. Now we're going to take this shape, Control C, paste here, Control F. Oops, did that still on the same layer. Paste here, Control F, and then intersect up here. Quickly reapply that light color. And then we'll just take this shape here, we'll cut that and we'll paste that on the trunk lines layer as well so that it's above those lines there. Perfect. That is the log done. We do have some lines on the floor in our original one. So we will quickly pop those in as well. We'll just call them a new layer underneath the trunk shadow layer. And we'll call these trunk shadow lines. Grab our blob brush tool. They look like they're the same color, if not this kind of blue instead. And these look to be a little bit thinner, so we'll just do them that for consistency. Again, we will absolutely be redoing these, so don't worry too much. Yours, you'll obviously get right first time. Mine, I'm going to redo with my pen later on. So they are just for reference. Let's actually grab all of these, put them in a more convenient place with Control X. We can delete our trunk shadows layer because I don't know what I was thinking. We want to go and paste them all on the foreground lines layer with Control F. There you go, much better. Trunk lines, done. So now we need to start thinking about our character. And he is probably the most complicated part of this section because we need to think about how he's going to animate and move. The rest of these animation bits are just going to sort of slide around the page. Whereas this guy is going to have individual animated elements for his like arms and his flames and things like that. We also need to think about whether we're going to have this lid flapping down, that sort of thing. So basically we're going to treat him as separate as possible. And we could, if you wanted to, build him in his own little file to make sure he's not too difficult. But we're going to build him in the same file just for simplicity here. Before I do that, however, I keep forgetting this trunk's shadow. So we'll just quickly pop him in. Like this. Boop, boop, boop. Boop, boop, boop. In he goes. Cool. We will make that almost black and we will reduce the opacity of that layer down to about 30%. There we go. Trunk shadow done. Let's start on our lighter boy. Okay, so first things first, we probably want to do the body. That's probably going to be the first thing. So we'll just call this one body. And we're just going to use the pen tool again. You could, if you wanted to, make a bit more of a rigid shape, use the rectangle tool, and then using your direct selection tool, if we just make him the right color. Choose your direct selection tool up here and individually move around these points if you wanted to. That creates something a little bit too rigid for me though. I don't really like that. he looks too square, you know, compared to the rest of like this organic design. You might want that. You might want that because it sort of creates a nice contrast. But me, I think I'm going to just draw this guy using the pen tool. So we're going to come in and grab the body. We're just going to choose the main sections of the body here. So it's going to be starting like this, adding little bits of curve to his body, just so it's not quite so rigid, you know. We'll worry about his legs in another step. And make sure to include all of the sections that this sort of bit is attached to, because that's going to make our life a bit easier later down the line when it comes to do all of the shading and that sort of thing. So that's the main section of the body. On the other bit, we're going to want a layer for the body right. Basically any section that's going to have its own individual bit of shading on it. So for the body right, we're going to make sure nothing's selected, just so that when we grab our pen tool and we click the same point as before, we don't accidentally select it. We're going to start where there is no point, like so, and then we're going to overlap there. You can bring this out because we're going to use this clipping mask technique that we had from before, like so, and then we're going to join up that section like that. We'll paint this a nice dark color just so we can see the difference originally, and then we will copy, paste in place on the body right layer, and choose intersect, same as before. And that creates a perfectly aligned section that when we color, we can see it's got no overlapping elements and no other bits just jankily sticking out. So we'll do the same with the top here. We'll name this body top. And we'll grab somewhere where we don't have a point yet. So we can just start over there, to be honest. Click that section here, making sure there's a point. Click that section there, making sure there's a point. Bring that guy across, add a little bit of curve so he doesn't look super rigid. Now here, it's important that we align. So if we snap, you can see we can snap there. Bring that section over and then pull that out. Grab the body from the previous layer, select the body top, paste in place, grab both of them, choose intersect. And this time we're going to choose the lighter color, like so. So you can see the difference between these block color sections and these painted sections here where we've softened out everything. So we will get to that, it's just not in this step. So that's the main body of our lighter. We now need to start adding in all of the little extraneous sections here. So I try and do it from the ground up. Okay, so like the lid will be next and then other stuff from there. So we'll call this one Hinge, and we'll create ourselves a nice rectangle, which we will zoom in and smooth the edges for. And then we can rotate this until it's roughly the same alignment as this section here. And we'll just shorten it to make that hinge. This will paint the same color as this body right section, like so. And why can't I see it? Oh, it's because I accidentally selected something where the opacity is way down. What did I select then? Oh, the sketch layer, I think. That'd be why. So there is our hinge. That's all good. That's why you can't eyedropper from here then, because you'll be eyedropping the 20% opacity layer. Should eyedropper from your color palette. Let's draw this lid. This lid is going to have to go under the hinge because it will be behind it. And we're just going to bring in a nice curve on that corner there. Looks good. Come up to this section, nice curve. Again, a nice curve. And around to here. Making sure there's no really harsh jagged edges or anything. And then collect that one up. Nice. Now we'll leave that one as it is, and we'll call this one lid base. And this color will be the sort of inside section here, which we'll paint later on to have a shadow so you can see it against the hinge. Above that, we're going to choose a new layer. We're going to mask out the rough section we want. like so. And we're going to draw in the top. Coming across, making sure there's no hard edge on the edge there. Good. Grab both of the base, copy and paste it onto this layer, select both, choose intersect, and choose a nice bright color for it. I think that one looks a bit better. So we'll do that. And we'll name this one lid top. Now we need a layer between lid top and hinge. And we can just start to roughly pop in this guy. So we don't actually need anything here to be accurate apart from where we want this edge to be. So we can line it up with there. Bring that in. And we'll make sure that this is painted the same color as the front. So this one should probably actually be that color. So that when we then select lid base, paste it on the same layer as lid front, select both of these, choose intersect. You can see we've got our colors good to go. Doesn't look too great like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this lid top layer. I'm just going to shimmy this one up a bit. Shimmy this point up a bit with the direct selection tool. And we're going to see how that looks. Oh, I don't know, because I like that curve. So I think what needs to happen is this point here needs to come down to match up with that point. And we can add that curve back in. There you go. That looks better. Again, we're going to be softening up all these colors later on anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to grab my hinge layer actually, and for now, I'm just going to make it a nice darker color just so we can see it against the rest of this stuff. And we're going to make sure that this lid front is below the hinge because the hinge sticks out a bit. There is lid front. So you can see our little guys starting to come together. Let's see what we've got else to draw. Let's do the legs. We'll do that underneath the body. So we'll grab one of our layers and we'll pop them under the body and we'll call him legs. These I am just going to pop on their own layer, and then later on if we need to separate them out, we can. So let's do that. Grab this guy, paint him the same color. We'll just add some shading later on. Come in here. And draw in some nice legs for our little lighter boy. And just to make sure that he looks as even as possible, what I'm going to do is, well, first of all, I'm going to paint him the right color, which is this color. Oops, and again, I clicked the wrong layer there, so I'm going to drag that opacity back up. I'm just going to Alt and drag him to duplicate, then transform, reflect vertically to flop him around, and then we'll just spin this guy out so that he's got two legs that are the same size. All right, looks pretty good. Let's do the arm that's behind his body. So that needs a layer here, arm behind. And again, this one is just a case of grabbing your pen tool and tracing like so. So if you're feeling pretty comfortable, you can obviously do the rest of this without watching this video. But if you are following along with this design and you want to see how it's all done, then obviously you can follow along with me here as I'm creating this stuff. If you're a bit more confident, you can go off and do it by yourself with your own drawing. So that's arm behind, happy there. Now arm front is a bit difficult because we need some fingers that are above this stick and a bit that's below this stick. So we'll do that. On top of the body and on top of body right, we need a new layer. And we're going to call this arm front bot for bottom. And then we'll need another layer for arm front top. And then we'll need another layer for arm stick. So arm front bot first then. We're going to grab this guy. Create ourselves a nice little shoulder lump. Bring that around in a nice smooth way. Now I'm using the pen tool, but you can of course use the curvature tool if you find yourself a bit more familiar with that. And there you go. Oh, bless me. That spiked the audio. I'm very sorry, everyone. Hopefully that woke you all up. That is the arm front bottom, fine. Then on the arm front top layer, we'll draw all of his fingers. And then in between that, we can add the stick. So grab our pencil. Make sure we're aligning with the edge here, just so it's a nice smooth transition away from the arm. And we'll pop in this dude's big thumb. Nice. I'm going to make a new layer for the fingers, just so that we can add that nice bit of shading later on if we want to. And for the fingers, I'm just going to grab my rectangle tool, round off those edges, rotate them, and duplicate them into position. At least for these two. For the pinky finger, I think I'm going to have to do a pen. And I'm going to just have to choose where the edge of that pinky is going to be. Because obviously it's going to be in front of or behind of the stick. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. Seems we're already over here, we'll do the stick next. So we've got arm, stick, and then we'll need some more layers for like the marshmallow and the like ends of the stick. No, that should do. Just stick and marshmallow for now. So we'll grab our pen tool and we'll just start to draw in this little stick, and hopefully it should all line up quite nicely with the hands that we've just drawn. That looks pretty good. Okay. That looks nice, apart from we don't want a green stick, preferably. We'd like a brown one. And there you go. We can see that the fingers and thumb are separate to the hand that goes underneath it. Awesome. Let's add in, just on the same layer, we'll just add in the ends of the stick here. We'll make that a nice brighter brown though. For some reason that's then gone onto the foreground layer. So I'll make sure we did all that on the right layer. Yes, we did. Paste that in place there. Rotate him around so that he's covering up the edge of the stick. That looks pretty good. Apart from we will just grab this individual point and align it to something. There you go. Looks a bit less rigid now. We'll also need one of these guys up here, just because of the way the angle of the stick is. So we'll just scale him up and position him until he covers up the end of the stick. Again, we can grab our individual points here and start tweaking them so it covers up the sections that we want. That's getting a bit high for me. He's a bit fat. So we'll just bring that down. Okay, the rest of the stuff we will add later, the rest of the texture. We will, however, add this marshmallow on its own layer, because we're going to have to add individual shading to the old marshmallow friend. I don't like how this bit sticks behind that corner, so I'm actually going to make this guy a bit shorter. And the way I did it before is I think I just brought this up and then I did like a splooged little S shape to indicate it's been stabbed on. I rounded off this section, pulled it out like that. Then I painted it a nice marshmallow color and shifted him up the stick a bit. And that looks pretty good to me. Maybe I don't like that little S. Maybe that just needs to be a normal stabbing shape. Yeah, that looks better. We'll just do that. Perfect. All right, final step then is this guy's face and his flames here. So let's do the face first. He's nice and cute. On top of body, I'm just going to do the face here. So we'll make a layer for the mouth. We'll make a layer for each eye. And we'll make a layer for the brows. Mouth is nice and simple. Again, it's just a cool little pen tool. Don't really want it to be this blue color though, so we'll make sure to fix that. By making it this sort of dark reddish color here. We also need to add in his blush, which we'll probably redo, to be honest, in After Effects. But we will just quickly add in some little blushing lines. Just so we know they're there. And then time to do the eye. For that, we'll obviously grab the ellipse tool. We'll Alt-Shift and reposition slightly. And we'll make this off-white. Then we'll Control-C, Control-F it. We'll shrink it down slightly and move it to the edge of the eye. We'll make it this nice dark color here. And then you guessed it, we're going to copy. We're going to paste in place. We're going to select both and choose intersect. And there you have our first eye. We can then just copy this and on the other eye layer, hit paste. We can rotate him around a little bit and reposition here. There you go. For the eyebrows, we'll grab our rounded rectangle tool again. We'll make them the same color as the blush and the mouth and stuff. And then we'll just position them nicely in an inquisitive little style. Huh? As he's toasting away, checking out his little marshmallows roasting. There you go. Looks pretty good. All right, last step then, the flames, the fun bit. This we're going to have to add under the stick layer because the stick might move in front of it. So we'll find where our arm stick layer is and we'll create a few new layers in here. I think about 5 should do. Maybe 6. So now we need the lighter top base. And we'll just grab our pen tool. And for this one, I think I did it all a shade darker. So the whole thing wouldn't be this color, it would be this one. And we're lucky at the moment because we've got that light bit on the top here for like the top of our lighter color. Why is he not looking so good? Because he's 19% rather than 100%. See, that's why you got to double check your things, right? He should be sort of that color, and he should be that color. And then he should also be below body top, should be below arm stick, and also below marshmallow. But now he's the same color as the marshmallow. With the shading, that's probably not a problem. What we will do, just for now, is we'll make him this kind of darkish color here. Okay, that doesn't look too bad. We'll do that as the color instead. Where was I? Lid top, don't care. Lighter top base. That's what we wanted. So we'll make the lighter top base this color from the front, and we'll turn on our sketch so we can see it. And we'll start to add this guy in. Remembering we're going to extend behind the flames because we're not really sure what we're going to be doing with the animation yet. So we'll draw the whole thing properly. No cutting corners. And there you go. So that is the lighter top base. We now need to do the same thing we did before with the right. So this will be lighter top right. Grabbing this guy, and this one we can be quite loose with up until actually we can be quite loose with it all because we're going to do a top section here anyway, so we can just do that. We'll make it the dark color. We can grab both layers, excuse me, grab the bottom layer, we can paste it in place, grab both, intersect them, make sure this guy is on the right layer by itself, which he is, and pop it there. Somehow again he's behind body top, so we'd want body top to be below lighter base, but the stick to be above it. Now lighter front's going to stay that color, so what we'll do is we'll turn lighter base to be this dark color here. Oops, excuse me. We'll select it from there. And now we'll add the front on. And the front will be nice and careful to get correct. So we'll have him swinging around like this. Around the front like this. And then around the back like that. And then we want it to be all the way around there. Now that bit I just need to tweak so that it does connect at least where I want it to. Then we can grab this, stick it on the right layer, which will be lighter top front. Paste in place. Paste in place, there we go. Copy lighter top bottom, paste it in place there. Grab this one, intersect them. Choose our nice light color. Ding. And see what we're working with. Okay, looks pretty good. This guy needs to move up a level so that he's covered there. And then we need to just draw in this top section. Now, one good way to do that is to select all three of these parts, copy and paste them onto a new layer. Excuse me, to a new layer. And we'll call this lighter top hole. Then we can go to our shape builder tool and we can merge these two shapes together and remove those two. And now we've got our shape that we need by itself. And there is the top of our lighter. Not super happy with it, not gonna lie, because I'm probably gonna want to shift these along like that. And just line them up a bit better with that shape. And that obviously means we'll need to adjust this guy underneath. Here. There we go. So that's all hidden away nicely. Cool, looks good. We will, on the same as the lighter top layer, lighter top front, this one, we'll add a new layer on top of that and we'll just say holes. And I think I did 4 holes, yeah, in this sketch version. So we'll grab our ellipse tool and line these up. He's a little bit at an angle to us so we can squish them horizontally somewhat. That guy would then have to move that way. And some holes there. Maybe something like that. Looks good. And we'll make these the same color as our nice dark color here. Pretty good. Actually, we'll maybe make that the nice dark. Yeah, that looks cool. All right, nice one. Now it's time for the flames, for which we will need 1, 2, and 3 layers. So we'll need flame bot, flame mid, and flame top. Now for this, I am going to go back to my curvature tool because I want them to be perfectly smooth. I'm going to grab a nice bold red color and I'm going to start going around here. Now this one, you can be as blazing as you want. Oops, excuse me. As blazing as you want. As long as you don't select any points on other shapes, it'll be nice and smooth all the way through, even if you click and drag a little bit. Who knew why I've gone Gloucestershire accent? Because I've been filming for ages and I'm losing my fucking mind. There we go. There is our base color. Flame mid. We'll make this nice toasty orange. And we'll do this shape here. And we'll also do a couple of these little circly bits. Some of the bigger ones. That's pretty good. And then flame top, we will do in this bright yellow color with the curvature tool selected. And we'll just do some nice additional flame elements, as well as one in the middle here, like that. Looks pretty good to me. And then you're ready for the big reveal. Boom. Our character created in Illustrator, ready to be brought into Photoshop to add texture. Now, I know that was really long. It's nearly an hour-long tutorial. But that's what this course is. It's a complete intro to. Hopefully you stuck around this long. If you have, thank you very much. You're very tenacious. I appreciate that and I respect it. And I'll see you for the second episode where we're going to be adding texture to this bad boy in Photoshop. So thanks very much, you guys, and I'll see you next time on TipTut. Part 2, adding texture. Hello everybody and welcome back to Complete Intro to Motion Design. Last time we created this little fella inside of Illustrator and all of our flat layers, and this time we're going to be dropping this guy into Photoshop and adding some of our guidelines for the grain that we're going to be animating then inside of After Effects. So basically we're going to make our little guy here look a lot like this little guy. So we're going to be adding all of this shading here. So this is a version that I created in Procreate. Obviously, we're going to recreate this in Photoshop just in case you don't have access to that. So first things first, we need to export this from Illustrator to a Photoshop ready file. And that's why we spent all that time last time creating these layers here. Okay. So now when we go to File, Export, Export As, we can, from the drop-down menu, choose Photoshop PSD. And we're just going to save that there. That's fine. It'll ask you a few settings. RGB is the color model you want for digital screens. Resolution, 150 or 72 ppi. I'm going to leave it 150. 72 is the standard, but with a lot of tablets and phones and stuff these days having a higher DPI than that, I like to leave it at 150. We want to write the layers. Definitely, we do not want a flat image, and we want maximum editability. We don't want type optimized, however, we want art optimized because we're drawing some art. If you want to, you can also embed the color profile to make sure your colors are matched correctly if you're using sRGB or Adobe RGB, that sort of thing. So once that has been created, we can pop down to our layer here and open it up in Photoshop. And you can see we have our complete Photoshop file. Now, Photoshop will not respect an artboard if you choose maximum editability and stuff like that. So you're probably going to have to go ahead and crop your artwork to the area that you want. So I'm just going to zoom in there. And we're going to go ahead and crop this guy. Now, I'm not going to go over how to use Photoshop. I do have an intro to Photoshop series that you can go ahead and watch, and I'll link that for you now. If you are not particularly au fait with Photoshop. If you are, however, we're not doing much here that you won't be able to understand. It's going to be fairly simple stuff. So roughly that shape will do. So I'm just going to hit accept, and I'm pretty happy with that. I will, however, make sure that we've got a perfectly square palette here by dragging this guy in, because I don't think the tree was that large. So we'll make it maybe 4440. That will do. So we'll go 4440 pixels by 4440 pixels. There we go. And that'll just make sure that we've got a nice square canvas here. So you can see that every layer we created in Illustrator has been respected here inside of Photoshop. Some things which were accidentally in groups have been popped into a folder. That's fine, doesn't really bother us. So we can just twirl those down to make sure that we're doing it all correctly. Now, any layer that was hidden, I don't think gets exported. For example, I cannot find my palette layer. That's not in here. So we're going to have to re-import that, but that's totally fine. It was only a reference layer anyway. So obviously you can add a palette to Photoshop, but what I'm going to do is just drag in this JPEG that I've got here. Again, this is the one that I got from Gigantic last time. So if you want to use this, then you can do so. You can download it from his store, which I will link also for you right now. So we've got our palettes, which we're working with. That's great. And we've got our artwork here. So what we're going to be doing is adding the shading in this section, which we will probably be recreating in After Effects. But it's very important to do this because A, this might be how you're provided this image by another designer if you were just the animator. B, you can then use this as a still image for like reference or for thumbnails of your final product, that sort of thing. And C, it's useful just to have it there and ready for you for any number of situations. What we're going to do is we're going to basically try and replicate this original one as much as possible. So I'm just going to drag this over here for reference. Obviously for you, if you're following along, you can do whatever you like using your own artwork. It's the same process, just different content. So I'm going to make a folder for the sky, and I'm just going to go and rename that group sky. Inside, oops, excuse me, I just edited my DPI there. Inside that sky folder, we now have sky lines and the sky layer itself. We're going to create a new layer on top of that. We're going to call this sky shading. And we're going to hold Alt and hover our mouse between those two layers. And when we do that, you can see just by my head here that we've got this sort of box with an arrow. If you click, that will create a clipping mask. And basically what that does is anything we draw on this layer will only appear in the area that has content on the layer below it. For example, if I just take a big yellow brush and just scribble that around, and we were to hide this foreground layer and a bunch of the others so we can actually see what's going on, you can see that this yellow, even though I'm painting it all over the place, it doesn't appear anywhere other than what our sky layer has content for. So we don't want that yellow. It's hideous, so we'll get rid of it. And we will choose a nice sort of bluish color from our palette. So I'm just going to grab my palette layer here. Now I'm using a graphics tablet for this, but you can absolutely just use a mouse. It really doesn't matter. We're going to make sure that we've got our sky layer selected, and we're going to choose just one of the darker colors for that. Probably this nice green. Now I've got a large soft brush that I've just hit with B, and I've just basically gone size all the way up, hardness all the way down. And I'm going to be using the open and close square brackets to resize this. And I'm just going to start painting in areas that I think should have a bit of shading on them. Now, the only issue is this one at the moment has got that nice sort of dotted grainy noise effect on it. And this brush that we've chosen doesn't have that. That's simply to fix. You just change the blending mode from normal to dissolve. And the good thing about this is you can obviously move after you've drawn if you're not entirely happy with how that looks. So yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. I think, however, it does need on top of this a sort of lighter blue, maybe this like grayish color here, just along this top of the sky. Just add a bit of texture up there, and that looks pretty good. And then we're going to make sure that the sky lines folder is below that as well, so that our shading goes on top of these lines, if you want that. If you don't want that, you can obviously leave those lines on top. I'm going to drag that below. We'll probably be recreating them anyway. And then I'm going to twirl down my sky folder because we're done with that layer. Now that is the process for this entire section. So if you're happy, you can just carry on without me. But if you want to follow along, we'll be doing that for the rest of these layers here. So the moon is up next, of course. So we're going to add a layer here. We're going to call this moon shading. I'm going to pop that above the moon lines folder. Oops, I will just, my head is in the way again. I don't know why I pop him this way. I'm going to reflect me, and I'm going to drag me all over here. It's because in After Effects, it's better for him to be down there, but in Photoshop and stuff, it's not. So I'll just pop myself over there. Okay, so we've got moon lines, moon shading. We're going to pop that in a folder called moon. And on the moon shading layer, we're going to Alt click, and it's only going to appear on that layer beneath it. Sounds good. So we're going to check that still works. No, that's only appearing on that layer. So we'll have to drag it there and then move that afterwards after we've drawn it. Yep, that's now appearing everywhere. I'll click it so that it's only going to appear on the moon. That's lovely. What we don't want, however, is that hideous blue color there. What we want is a nice sort of darkish pink color. So we've got the moon here. We'll take this lighter pink and we'll just shade in the bottom of the moon there, like so. Nice and gentle touch. Maybe we'll also get a pure white and we'll just lightly touch the top of that moon. Change that below to dissolve. And that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Maybe it's a touch heavy. So I'll grab my eraser brush and I'll just get rid of that bottom bit. Oops, that was not eraser, that was just paintbrush. So I'll drag this guy up and we're going to leave this one fairly solid so that we can actually erase things properly. Grab our lighter pink color and just with a bit of a lighter touch, maybe with a larger brush, we can just come in. Boom, 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 like that. That looks pretty good. Okay. Yeah, that'll do. Collapse down that moon. So this is basically the process for the entire thing. You create a layer, you clipping mask it, you name that mountains shading, and you pop all three of those things in a folder that you call mountains. Now, all this foldering and naming is very important because when it comes to moving this across to After Effects, this will create things like subcomps and name them in the same way you've named them inside Photoshop. So it's really useful to make sure you're getting that correct early on. What color is that? Is that this color? Yes. So we'll choose this darker blue. We've got our clipping mask on. Nice large brush. And we're just going to come in, paint the bottom of this mountain in. Change that blending mode to dissolve. And it's a little bit harsh, so we're just going to shimmy that guy down a bit using the arrow keys. That looks pretty good. Happy with that. So we'll collapse down the mountains. Now we have our foreground. So again, we'll add a layer. Foreground. We'll alt click it. Foreground shading. And we'll pop all of these in a folder. And we'll call that folder foreground. Twirl that down. Now I like working from the bottom to the top purely because it means I don't waste time creating good shading on bits you're not going to see. And also it makes sense for me to build up an image that way. If you were to do this traditionally, obviously you'd paint from the bottom to the top. There's no other way to do it. We're afforded a bit more luxury, thankfully, when we're doing things digitally. So that's useful for us to be able to edit and work in any way that we'd like. But I still really enjoy working from bottom to top. We're going to change this to dissolve now so we can see what we're getting. Bit heavy-handed there. So I'm just going to undo some of that. Go to dissolve mode. Now, if you're finding it a bit heavy-handed, you can, of course, reduce the flow of your brush. And that will lighten things up a little bit for you. Lighten up the touch. And then I think we had a bit of shading down here as well. Ooh, didn't like that. Let's make that really big. We'll zoom out and we'll start drawing over here. And that means only the very edges of our brush will actually touch the canvas there. Okay, that's pretty good. Happy with that. So we'll collapse our foreground shading. And we'll move on to our leaves. So I'm going to zoom right in for this one because it's going to be for these small plants here. And I'm going to just scale down the brush here. So the good thing about this is, oops, I think where's my preview gone? There we go. The good thing about this is even though I make the brush smaller, if you then turn it to blending mode, dissolve, the dot size stays the same, which is really useful for us. So inside leaf copy, which is this pink one here, I'm going to add a new layer, alt click it, and stick it in a folder. Leaf 1. We'll call this leaf 1 pink. So we can rename things, doesn't really matter. Leaf 1 pink shading. Now, naming these shading layers isn't super important because when it pre-composes this inside of After Effects, it's going to obviously be the only layer inside of that folder. But if you don't mind labeling things and it doesn't bother you, then I'd still recommend you do it because it doesn't take too long. So just checking that's the right color there. We're going to want this darker color instead. We're going to zoom back in. And we're just going to start to paint in these layers. Now, one thing I've immediately noticed is that is in the wrong order. this I'd like to be on the top. So what I'm going to do is just drag it to the top of those 3 leaves. So you can reorder things, doesn't really matter. And it's not going to affect your drawing in any way. Looks pretty good. We're going to go to collapse this guy. We're going to then go to leaf 2, see what one that is. That's on the right. I'd like that one to be above leaf 3. So we're going to alt click that layer, select both of these, group them, call it leaf 2 pink. And I'm not going to bother naming these anymore because like I mentioned before, it doesn't actually matter for those interior ones due to the fact that they're going to be inside a composition called leaf 2 pink. So there's only 2 layers in there. We'll take leaf 3, just in the interest of saving time. We'll grab both these layers, we'll group them together. We'll call them leaf 3 pink. And we'll just paint in. Maybe we'll bring this one out a bit further. Change that to dissolve mode. It's a bit heavy-handed for me. So going to reduce that down. All right, that looks pretty nice. The stalks, I'm just going to leave by themselves. I think I did add a bit of stuff in the first one though, so maybe we will just add that. If we go to stalks pink, sorry. Inside stalks pink, we've got our top layer. We're going to select this dark color, check that it's similar to the one we've got in here, and I'm just going to grab like this nice hot pink, and I'm just going to tease the tops of these. That looks pretty nice. And then when we change to dissolve mode, boom, that looks good. We like that a lot. Yeah. Okay, great. Carrying on then, collapse this guy down. We've now got these other leaves here. So how long is this episode? It's only 16 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed through the rest of the background stuff here for the trees. And then I'm going to come back once we get to our character, because that bit's going to be quite complicated. So just so I don't bore you to death, we're going to speed through the rest of this background now. So I'll see you on the other side of this time lapse. Okay, so we've finished all of the noise on our background layers there. And as you can see, it's starting to look a little bit like this section we did in Procreate from earlier. Looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. So let's jump right into our character. Now, just to make this a little bit easier on myself, I'm going to hide all of my other layers. So we've just got the character that we're working with here. Okay, just makes it a little bit easier to consume, to get distracted with all the different colors. So we're going to start and work on how we think this guy is going to have shading applied to him. We're not going to worry too much about the flames impacting it because we can add that sort of stuff later on in After Effects. So we're literally just going to go and start adding in layers for each section that we know is going to need shading. Like his arm or the behind arm, for example, is going to need its own bit of shading. The body, definitely, the mouth, all this sort of stuff. So it's the same process, but I just wanted to do this one in real time because I thought it might be a bit easier to consume for you guys, so you don't have to watch me do all the boring stuff and you can actually watch me do the interesting bit. So I'm going to select this color that we've got from our character body, and I'm going to go 2 shades darker, and I'm just going to start shading in his arm there, making sure I'm on the right layer. I'm going to swap that layer to dissolve mode, and I'm just going to shrink down my brush. I'm going to go quite hard there on the back, just because I believe that sort of around this area is where the most shadow is going to come because it's being cast down from this lid here. On the body, we're going to actually have a few types of shading. I'm going to stick them on the same layer here because it's just reference. In After Effects, when we move to it later, however, it's probably going to be on separate layers. We'll pop that inside a folder called Body. And I'm going to, again, choose the darker color, but probably just this mid one. I'm going to increase the size of my brush. I'm just going to pop in and around here. Now, one thing I've noticed already is that his legs seem to be above his layer by quite a bit. Now, I could hunt for them in the layer palette here, or I could hold Control and click them like so. And that should bring up, there we go, the layer inside it. Now it thinks it's body top, and that's because foolishly I did them on the same layer as the top of his body there. So what I'm going to do is grab my lasso tool. I'm going to drag around this section. I'm going to hit Control X to cut it. I'm going to add in a new layer, which I'll call legs. And paste them. Oops. Control Shift Alt V. Control Shift V. Control Shift V is the shortcut for that in Photoshop to paste in place. Then we're just going to move that legs layer below the body, outside of the body folder. Let's quickly do the shading on the legs then, because that's going to impact shading on the body. Call that legs. And we'll just use the same color here. Actually, to be consistent, we'll use this darker shade. Same shade we used on the arm. And we'll just pop that guy a bit of shading. Nice, that looks pretty good. Okay, back to the body then. So we'll change this to dissolve mode. We'll select the same color that we need. Okay, and we'll just start painting in this guy's shading. So I want like a nice curve down the bottom there. That looks pretty good. And then there'll also be a lighter color, really light touch, just up here. There, that looks pretty good. Okay, great. The mouth does not need any shading. The blush does not need any shading. These eyes, however, do they need shading? The eyes will. I'm going to pop them in the same layer, same folder, because I'm going to want to animate them in the same folder later on in the same subcomposition. And I'm going to select the eye layer, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab my magic wand tool. And I'm just going to select, oops, excuse me, making sure I'm on the right layer here. I'm just going to select this dark black section. I'm going to grab a lighter gray. I'm going to alt click that. And I'm just going to paint in the top of his iris there. There, that looks nice. So it doesn't affect the white behind it. We'll do the same on this one. Shift, alt click on the eye layer. Ooh, I'm getting a phone call, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. That was the in-laws. So what were we doing? We were doing eyes. I'm going to grab my magic wand tool, select that pupil, paint in just the top of it, and then change that to dissolve mode. And that looks pretty good for the eyes. Happy with that. Control D will deselect that for you. Oh, that didn't work. Why is he not on dissolve mode? Did I change the wrong layer to dissolve? I think I did. Yes, I changed the actual eye layer. That's not what we want. We want that to be normal. We want that to be dissolve. And I drew it on the wrong layer. That's why it's not working. That's why you've got to be careful. If you're not careful, you'll balls the entire thing up. So there we go. Paint him there. Dissolve mode. Much better. Now we're happy. Collapse down those eyes. The brows don't need shading on them at all, but the body right does. So we'll add a new layer. We'll clip that. Grab both of these, stick them inside a folder, and call it body right. Then we're going to grab that shading layer, and we want our nice dark color again. This is already this nice dark color, as you can see when I'm eyedroppering them both. So I'm going to go down to my darker red here and grab that one. Change this blending mode to dissolve, and we'll increase the brush size just a little bit, and then we'll just start painting up from the bottom. And we kind of want this to roughly match. Oh God, that was a bit much. Excuse me, roughly match. There we go. The height of this other bit of shading on the front of his body. Collapse down body right. Now this is the arm front. So for this one, we just want a little bit of shading on the shoulder, because otherwise it kind of stands out quite a bit from there. So we'll alt click there on a new layer. We'll grab both of them. We'll call this arm right. Oops, if we can spell. And for this one, however, we will just grab this color, which is the same color as the top of this section here. And that's because then when we come to draw this guy in, he should blend a little bit nicer with the top of the arm. That looks pretty good. Okay, that's most of his body done. So we'll just keep going. Body top then is just now this remaining top section, which we're just going to add a lot of bright color onto, because obviously the flame is going to be around here. So body top. We'll grab, it's already this darker color, which is this one. So I think we're just going to go for this brighter color here. And we'll just paint in like so and dissolve it and see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. We'll just stick with that, to be honest, because on this front section here, we're going to be adding this lighter white. So that will separate that out. Lighter top base. We can't even see. Just checking. So I'll delete that layer. Lighter top front is that front section. Holes are the holes. Lighter top right and lighter top hole. There we go. So lighter top front, we'll do that section first. We'll alt click to link those layers, create a clipping mask, pop them inside a folder, call it lighter top front. And here is where we're going to grab this nice bright white color here. And just from the edges, we're just going to creep that in like that. And then when we turn to dissolve mode, that'll look really nice. The holes don't need any shading. If you wanted to, you could probably reduce the opacity of these a bit because they look a bit dark. But we'll just leave them on there. If you wanted to add shading onto these, you could do. You could just alt click that, grab both, type in holes. What I would recommend you do is you go in really, really close for this one, like all the way in. You scale all the way down and you choose basically the darkest red color that you've got, which doesn't exist. So we'll just grab that gray. And you'll just have to really carefully like, whoop, 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 and change it to dissolve mode. There you go. As you see, you can't really see it, so it doesn't really matter anyway if you miss that one out. Lighter top right, same process. Group that together. Make sure you scale that brush back up again. And this time, remember, we've got a lot of light coming from the top. So instead of making the bottom darker, we're going to make the top lighter. So we've got that color. Yep. We'll grab 2 shades brighter than it because it's right next to the flame. And we'll just fade that in and dissolve it. Oh, that looks a bit heavy-handed. So we'll retry that. Try dissolving it first. Let's increase the brush size to make a bit of a softer grain. And then there you go. That looks pretty good. All right. Now we've got the lighter top hole, which we definitely will need some shading for, but this time we're going to make it dark. So we'll grab both those layers, stick them inside a folder, lighter top hole. And we'll grab that same dark color we did here. And we'll just creep in. We'll just creep in from the bottom. Boop, 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 like that. Turn it to dissolve mode. And it's a bit heavy-handed, so we'll just shift that down. Bit hard to see unless you zoom in. We don't want that to be too much. Maybe something like that looks pretty good. All right, good. Up next, we've got flame bot, flame mid, flame top. I'm just going to pop all these in a folder for now and we'll come back to them. And then I'm just going to type not done yet on that folder so that we can just see quickly that's where they are. I just want to do those last because they should technically be sort of way at the top there. But it's just in case they're down there, just in case this lid, we choose to sort of collapse it down like so. And it would then obviously have to be on top of those flames. So what we'll do is we'll leave that for now and we'll start doing the stick and stuff. Now the stick, I want a layer that has some shading, but also I want a layer that has some lines on it as well that we didn't do in the original one. So I'm just going to call this arm stick. We'll do our shading first of all. So we'll go to our brush tool, make sure we're on the right shade of brown, which I think is this one. Yeah. And we'll just go to the lighter shade and we'll just paint that guy in a bit, change it to dissolve mode. Maybe we'll just do that. Try that top bit again. That was pretty heavy-handed. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then my other thing was I was going to scale the brush all the way down. And then on a new layer, still on the dissolve brush, doesn't really matter. I was just going to add in some little stick lines. I'm not sure if I liked these in the original one though, because there's nothing really else like them in the whole bit. So should I keep them? No, I don't think we should. I think we should delete that layer. there is our stick, and we're onto the marshmallow. Quite like this marshmallow. Marshmallow. Make sure we scale our brush all the way back up again so we can see what we're doing. And this one I am going to add 2 tones of shading to. We're going to have a bit of white near the top there. And we're also going to have just a tasty little hint of pink, just popping in from the bottom. Then that should look pretty good when we hit dissolve. Oh yeah. All right. We now get to do the fingers. Now, these I'm not sure on. Okay. I think what we should do is leave the thumb, which should be on top of the fingers. We'll leave that alone. But on the fingers layer, we will add in some noise, some grain. Okay. And bear with me, and I'll explain why. If we zoom in, and we grab this darker color and we just create just a little quick off like that. Yeah. That's going to highlight the thumb for us, which means we don't need to do anything on the thumb to highlight it from the rest of the body. Okay. Just makes it really easy to see, really easy. And it saves us a layer, and it saves us some animated grain later on. This means we can leave that thumb alone. So now we've got the lid. The lid base is definitely going to need some shading, some hefty shading. So we'll stick that inside a folder, lid base. And I'm going to grab this same dark color here, which I believe was this one. And we're going to stick that on its own layer, nice big brush. And we're just going to start all the way down here and drawing little circles. We're going to spam our way up like that. Going to make sure it's really heavy on this side because that's going to obviously be delving deeper inside the lid. So it should be darker. Okay, looks good. Lid front, we'll need to do some highlights on this, I think. So we'll add in a layer. We'll link those 2 layers together. Pop them inside a folder. Call that lid front. So as you can see, the process for this is very simple. It's just a little bit time consuming. I think that's fine. I don't mind time consuming stuff so long as it looks good, which I think this does. I think this looks fucking great. The hinge, we'll definitely need a bit of shading on the hinge. So we'll come in and we'll grab that guy and we'll pop them in a folder. Oops. We'll make sure they're actually in the folder, first of all. And we'll grab that same dark purple that we had before. And we'll just, from behind here, we'll just bring that in a little bit. Make that a dissolve. Looks pretty good. And then the last layer, here we go, lid top. Create a folder for it, which we will call lid top. Boom. Grab this color, and I think what we're going to want is just this pink here. Just want it touching the edge of that tip. Dissolve. Now we can collapse down all these layers we've been working on, and we can take a look at the final result. So let's hide our color palette for now and bring back in all our other layers. Boom. There we go. There we have it. We have our little guy grained up and ready for animation inside of After Effects for some motion design. There we go. We'll say it right eventually. So that is everything apart from the motion done. So that was 2 episodes of just setting up. Now, obviously, you might have had this file handed to you by someone else and you wouldn't have had to do this section. But I think it's worth going through because all this sort of folder organization, the folder organization has come in handy. Because as I'm looking at it, I've noticed I forgot to do the flames. Foolish. I've been foolish. I'm going to add in a layer on Flame Bot. I'm going to grab my brush tool. I'm going to re-enable my color palette. I'm going to grab a nice dark red. And I'm going to start booshing in some of that and make it dissolve. Nice. Then we'll do the same for the Flame Mid. So this is, again, I completely missed that. But because we took our time to label our layers, I didn't miss it permanently. Would have been a right pain in the ass if I missed that later on. Very important to label your layers. Oops, wrong color. Paint in some of that. Dissolve it. Lovely. There we go. Now we're done. And we can rename this guy. All right. Look at that, dude. Thanks very much for joining me, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this one. And next time we're going to start on the motion. And I'll see you there. Part 3. Basic motion in After Effects. All right. Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut and welcome back to Complete Intro to Motion Design. This is episode 3 now and we're going to start animating inside After Effects. The last 2 episodes what we've done is created this little guy inside of Illustrator and then brought him into Photoshop to add some guidelines for the noise effects that we'd like to see when we create these inside of After Effects. One thing I will go over now though is preparing this file for After Effects, because what I didn't realize or what I got wrong accidentally was that yes, creating a folder in Photoshop will create a pre-comp inside of After Effects, but so too will creating a clipping mask and a layer. This will create its own folder and its own pre-composition. So what that actually does is drop anything that's inside a folder inside a double composition, which is just a pain in the butt for you guys. So all I did was I selected all of my layers like so, and then I control clicked the twirl down option. And then I just came through and I just selected all the layers I wanted and I dragged them outside of the folders like that. Okay. And any layer that has a clipping mask applied will be turned into a composition inside After Effects with the name of the non-clipped layer. So to show you what that looks like, it just becomes this inside of Photoshop. Same exact file, but with no folders. And that took me about 2 minutes to do, so it's not too bad. Another thing I did was crop this down to 1920 by 1920 pixels. And I just did that by cropping the entire canvas, making sure delete cropped pixels was turned off, and then I just scaled the whole thing down to match it. And that's just so that my computer doesn't have a meltdown trying to render a 4K animation whilst also screen recording and all that other stuff. So we're going to get to the fun bit now. We're going to get to some motion. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure you import your file, your Photoshop file correctly into After Effects. And the way to do that is just to go to your project panel and either choose File, Import, or use the shortcut Control I. Control I opens up the import window here, and I'm going to grab my Sketch 1920 PSD file and I'm just going to hit import. That's going to bring up this import window, and there's a few settings you want to get correct here. First of all, you want to make sure it's on composition retain layer sizes, and what that will do is inside of your pre-compositions, it'll make sure that the layer sizes aren't the full size of the comp, they'll be the size of the actual content that they are. You want to make sure it's on editable layer styles, and then you can hit OK. Hello everyone, I'm just pausing this video to quickly tell you that if you haven't checked out my Intro to Motion Graphics series and you're brand new to After Effects, I would really recommend watching that series, at least the first episode of it first, because there are a few basic After Effects controls here that I do sort of gloss over throughout this series just because there's so much to get through. So if you haven't opened After Effects before, go watch that video now, which I'll be linking in the description and on the screen. However, if you're fairly comfortable in After Effects, you should be fine. Okay, I won't stop you again, or maybe I will. Who knows? Back to the video. That will import and create a pre-composition, which is your entire Photoshop file, as well as a folder with all the different layers from your Photoshop file and the pre-made compositions that make up those layers. So we can just leave that in that folder to be nice and neat, and we can open up our sketch file with a double click. So we have our composition now inside our composition window here. And if we look down at our layers palette, we've got all of these layers, and you can see that each folder or each clipping mask that we made inside of Photoshop is respected here inside After Effects. So if we open up our lid top layer, we should see we have 2 layers here, one of which is our grain that we made, and one of which is our lid base itself. Okay. And you can also see that the clipping mask has been applied to this layer. Although it is larger, we can still move it around and all of that information still exists, okay? And that's important for later on. What that is though is just track matting that below layer, this lid top layer here. Now our first steps we're going to be doing is recreating this dissolve so that we can animate it and make some nice animated grain effects inside After Effects. And then we're going to take a look at some basic animation to get this guy moving. And that'll be more than enough for today. So if you hit tab, it will bring up a quick flowchart composition, and you can just pop back to your original comp here, or of course you can just select it up in your project layer. So if I expand this area just quickly, you can see that we've got all of the layers that we need. Anything that didn't have a pre-comp was just given its own layer by itself. And anything that wasn't named, like the trunk lines here, I can just quickly name like so. I'm going to use the lid of our little lighter guy here as an example of how we're going to set up this animated grain. And then I'm probably going to time lapse through the rest because it is exactly the same process for each layer. So don't worry about missing anything. So I'm just going to select lid top here and I'm going to go inside that composition. As you can see, we have two layers. We have our grain layer and we have our lid top layer. Now we're going to replace this grain with an animated version, and we're going to do that for every layer that we have inside After Effects. So we're going to go to layer new and then solid. We can call this grain because we'll be using it over and over again, and making it the same size as our composition is totally fine. Black is also totally fine because we're going to be adding an effect to it where we control the color. So let's go to our effects and presets panel, and we're going to type in roughen edges, or just roughen to bring that up. And we're going to drag and drop that onto our layer. We're also going to type in fill, and we're going to drag and drop the fill effect onto that layer as well, making sure that it's after our roughen edges. If we hide this layer, we can zoom in, and I'm just using space to pan around there. We can zoom in, and on our fill effect inside our layer, we're going to choose the eyedropper tool and choose this dark color here, like so. When we revisibilize that layer, you can see that it's now the same color as our grain, which is perfect. And you can also see this weird bumping around the edge of the line here. Now this is our roughen edges. What we're going to do is push this to its far extremes in order to turn it into some kind of animated grain. Now, these settings are going to be dependent on your canvas size, but for me, what I found was I increased the border to max, which is 500, and you can see that you get these really, really rough edges, okay? We're going to basically turn this into our grain. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to set a roughen mode to cut, which basically just makes things a little bit harsher. And there's a few other settings here that you need to make sure are correct. Sorry if you can hear that. That's my cat going absolutely ham on a scratching post behind me. Baby, honestly, baby, I'm recording. We want to turn up the edge sharpness again to max, which I think is 10. Yeah, that's correct. And we're going to turn the scale all the way down. This one will depend on your canvas size. For a canvas size of 1920, I found that the minimum of 10 works quite well. And you can see already that's starting to look a little bit like the noise that we want. I am going to turn the complexity up to max, which is 10 as well. And you can see that brings in a little bit more detail here. Now, at the moment, this is still static noise. Okay. We want this to be animated, and we can animate it by just changing the evolution on this dial. If I click and drag, you can see it starts to dance a little bit on the screen. But what we're going to do is animate this using a script. I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard, and I'm going to click the little stopwatch next to evolution in our effects palette. That will bring up in our layers palette the evolution, and we can apply an expression to it. This expression is going to be very simple. We're simply going to type time and then the asterisk, which in this case is multiply. So time times a number. Now the number I found works quite well for me is 1500. And this is basically 1500 increments a second. And as you can see now, that really starts to make our content animate quite well. If we watch the RAM preview, you can see it's going quite fast in its animation. Okay, if you want that to be a bit slower, then of course you can just reduce the number here to maybe times 750, and that will reduce the speed. You can see that it's, once it's pre-rendered, goes a little bit slower. Now, this depends entirely on your preference. Me, I like 1500, so I'm going to leave it on 1500. Now, that is our grain layer finished. We're going to copy and paste this layer all over our document, and we're going to use each one of those examples as that sort of animated section of grain. But at the moment, it obviously fills the screen. We don't want that. We want it to just fill this same area that layer 29 currently fills. So this is the smallest amount of grain you can get. If you want it to be smaller, you can actually just scale down the layer, and you can see that obviously makes your grain a bit more detailed. I'm going to scale it down to 50% because it also makes it easier to work with. And I'm going to position it just over the rest of my content. Now, all these little guides that are popping up are just because I have this snapping option enabled here. Now I'm going to drag that below our grain layer. And I'm going to take my lid top layer. I'm going to duplicate it, okay, with Control D. And then I'm going to drag that above my grain layer. Okay, now we can see that we've got that base layer beneath it. We're going to hide our original grain layer. And on our After Effects grain layer, we're going to make sure we've got our track matte options open by clicking toggle switches /mode. And we're going to say alpha matte lid top 2. And what that basically does is only show the grain layer where there is content on the lid top 2 layer. So that obviously will fill our lid and nowhere else. So to get the grain just where we want it, we just simply select our pen tool from the menu at the top, and clicking and dragging, we're just going to mask out the section that we want to have grain. Boom. And once you've finished, you'll notice that it will apply all the effects that we did on our roughen edges, but only to the area of this mask. Okay. However, it's got a harsh line, which is not what we want. So we can just go to our grain mask, twirl that down, twirl it down mask 1, and increase our mask feather. Now for my composition, I found about 100 pixels worked, which basically means that soften the edges of each mask by 100 pixels. Again, yours will depend on your composition size. And there we go. If we RAM preview that, you can see that we've got our first bit of animated grain. Now, the only next step is to go through and do that for the rest of the composition. Now, as you can see, that's going to take a little bit of time, and it is exactly the same process as I just showed you. So I'm not going to do that at normal speed. I'm going to do that at super duper speed, and I'll see you on the other side, and I'll drop back out if I do anything different or anything that I think requires calling attention to it. Apart from that, let's do it. Hi everyone, post-editing Matt here with a quick PSA just to say maybe you'd like to leave this first step to the end of your project instead, unless you're working from a fairly beefy PC. Doing all these roughen edges effects does put quite a strain on your computer, and if you're working from a laptop or something, it might not be able to keep up. There's no reason you can't do it at the end instead of at the beginning. It's completely up to you. So if you're working from a weak PC, consider doing this point at the end. I do show you a trick, however, in a minute to reduce the rendering effort that your PC needs to put in, so don't worry too much about it. Okay, back to the video. Okay, so once I'm happy with a certain section and I know later on that section is not going to need any individual animation, like for example this hinge here, what I'm going to do is take all the layers that are on the top of this lid section, like so the top, hinge, front and base. I'm going to pre-compose those. We're going to go to pre-comp. We're going to go to lid complete and move all attributes to the new composition. That's fine. So what this does is it will move all those lid sections into one bit by itself. And I'm just going to add a quick mask to this that basically encompasses the entire lid. And what this will do is move all of our transform controls to the outlines of that mask, which means when we do things like move our anchor point using the pan behind tool to the section that we're going to want rotating, okay, it means that we can apply and see all those changes in sort of one easy to use composition. And then we can go inside that composition if we want to and still edit all of the different sections, okay? One thing I have noticed though is that all these comps are only 2 seconds long. We're going to need much more than that. And we want this animation to last longer than that as well. So I will quickly go in and I'll make all of these compositions. Let's do 20 seconds in length. And then we'll get back to the animating the grain. Hi everyone, post-editing Matt here. I tried to figure out why the default composition length was 2 seconds in this case, and I couldn't really figure it out. I think it's something to do with the length of the last composition that you made, which for me was these test projects that I was creating. So a possible way around this would be to create a default composition that is like 40 seconds and empty, and then delete that and re-import your Photoshop file, and it should be 40 seconds long. I mean, it only took me like 5 minutes to fix this, but just so you guys don't have to go through that, you could probably try that as a way to get around it. All right, cool. Time lapse should be over now. Let's get back to the video. Okay, so after I've made all of those compositions 20 seconds long, it's just then a case of selecting them all using shift-click and dragging their ends out so that they are actually filling the 20 seconds of our composition here. So you can see I've done the animation on our lid layer here and collapsed it down. And I'm just going to work my way through the rest of these layers and do the rest of the animation now inside of here. I will show you this one because it's got 2 types of shading on it. It's got the darker section here and the lighter section, although the actual process is exactly the same. It's just a case of copying and pasting one of your previous grain layers, going to your marshmallow layer, which is here, pasting that in so we've got a section of grain, and I'm just going to drag that above my first marshmallow layer, duplicate that marshmallow layer, put it on top and hide it. Then when we move our grain into place, it will start filling only that section. We can make that grain the same color as the dark one first. So we'll just grab that dark color. We'll hide our original grain layer for now, and we'll just do our first mask. So we'll come in and we'll grab this bottom section, like so. And that should mask out all of those layers. And we will feather just a little bit. And as you can see, because our mask is really small, it's only touched the very edge of the shading there. So if you wanted to, you could push that further in to increase that. Or another way to increase it is to select your pen tool, edit the actual mask itself, and make the back end bigger. I know that doesn't seem to make much sense, but if you think about it, the more area that this is visible, the more solid mass we're going to have before that grain starts to come in. So that's the first dark grain. Okay, and then to do the brighter one, you literally just select both those layers, duplicate them, and then change the position of the mask here, which I'm just going to delete and redo to give yourself a second mask, and just change that mask's color to pure white. And then there you've got your brighter section, like so. You can then position to your heart's content, and as you drag through, the animated grain will be there, but in 2 parts. Okay, going to do the rest of the character now, and we'll probably drop back in when we come to the background because I might do it on a slower rate. I'll see you on the other side. One thing I will skip doing are the flame layers, and that's because we're probably going to be recreating these completely later on in the next episode. So I am just going to skip them for now. And to make sure I remember to do them later, I'm just going to hide those layers. Again here, now that I know I'm done with this section, I'm going to select all 4 layers that make up the little spout of the lighter. I'm going to pre-compose those, and I'll call them lighter top, because that's what they're called here. Then I'm going to grab my mask tool, and I'm just going to generally and roughly click around this area. This is just so that later on when we come to animate it, all of our transform controls are nice and tight to that particular section of the composition. Okay. That's right, that last time lapse was so powerful, I've changed jumper and put on headphones. Just kidding, it's a different day. It's Christmas. Actually, no, it's Boxing Day today. As you can see from the date in the bottom corner there, the last one was recorded on Christmas Eve. So, I don't know why I'm telling you that. It doesn't actually affect the video. Never mind. So, let's carry on then. We have now, as you can see, finished animating all of our grain. Now, this looks really cool. I really like this a lot. However, you've probably found, we haven't animated the grain in the eyes, but that's because I decided I didn't want that in the end. You'll probably find this is putting quite a strain in your computer, as we mentioned earlier in this video. So what we're going to do now is we're going to animate the background elements to our liking. And then in order to reduce the load on the computer, we're actually going to pre-render that into a video and then use that video in the background of our composition. That's just a good way to reduce the load on your particular project. So to help that, what we're going to do is, for now, we're just going to hide all of our layers that aren't part of the background. So let's just get rid of everything apart from our background layers. So we're going to need our trees, our tree trunks. We don't want the trunk lines. What element is these lines on? Is that in here somewhere? Oh, that'd be foreground lines. We can leave those on for now. That's fine. So we've got basically everything here that we're going to need for our background. And we're going to, first of all, pre-compose that. So grab all of these layers with shift click, right click and choose pre-compose. Move all attributes is fine. We'll just call this one background. hit OK. Okay. So first of all, we can then double click inside that background, and we're now only working with our isolated background elements, which is very useful for us because we're going to start animating now. First thing I'm going to do though is grab all of my lines layers, like these ones here, and foreground lines. And why can't I do that with that? Is it because, why can't I do that? I can do it with this Photoshop file. Odd. I'm just going to change the mode to soft light. I think it just looks a little bit nicer. So we're going to grab, what's this? That's our mountain lines. So we'll make sure to name that. And we're going to come through and change all these to soft light. I just think they look a little bit nicer. If soft light doesn't work, we can try screen for darker or lighter elements. This is our moon lines. So we'll need them. Moon lines. Soft light. Let's try. Oh no, let's try multiply actually for this one. Basically, I'm going to go through the blending modes and see which one I prefer for each one. I think for this one, overlay. It loses a lot of its color though. Maybe for this one, we'll leave it on normal, but we'll reduce its opacity down. Basically, I'm just looking to soften out some of the sort of contrast between all these elements because they look a bit bold for our background, which we don't want. Maybe soft light, screen mode, lighten mode, multiply mode, and then like 70%. It's just to soften all of that up, basically. Tree lines, we can try soft light. No, that doesn't work either because the background is dark. That was silly of me. Let's leave that as it is, but reduce the opacity down to about 80%. Okay, that's starting to look pretty good. I'm happy with that. So we're going to take a look at animating these elements now. Now, in the background, I was thinking about having some of these lines move. Now we could do that with all sorts of things. I'm going to try applying a wave warp to these. So I'm going to grab my sky lines here. I'm going to go up to my effects and presets panel. And I'm going to type in wave, drag my wave warp over to here. Now, as you can see, that's going to warp them quite heavily. So we're going to want to grab our wave type, make sure that's on sine. And we're going to increase our wave width until it's almost back to normal. And then as you can see here, we can start to phase these lines and you'll see they'll just start to gently move, which is really quite nice. The wave speed will drop down to about 0.5, so it's not quite so fast. And the wave height will drop down to about 6, again, so it's just a little bit flatter. Let's make that a nice even 300 for the wave width. And we'll change the wave direction to be not exactly 90 because the main one is this sort of like slightly up slanted one here. So we'll just change that line to somewhat follow that section. Then we're just going to do the same thing we did with the phase here as we did with the roughen edges, apart from it's going to be much slower. Might just be time times, let's try 5, see what that looks like. If we were to play and pre-render a second of this footage, you can see that it moves quite slowly, barely noticeable actually, which is quite good. Let's pre-render 2 seconds and see what that looks like. If pre-rendering is going quite slow for you, you don't have to watch this in full view mode. What you can do is turn on a thing called adaptive resolution, which will help you when you're zooming in and moving around. And you could probably drop down to about third view quality and see how quickly that renders for you. As you can see, that's sped up that rendering significantly, especially with all these roughen edges effects that I mentioned before, which is another reason why you might want to apply those last. Let's take a look. Ooh, I liked that bit. It jumped fast forward quite quickly there. So just going to hit N to crop that off. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with that sort of level of movement on those. You can see that they've started to come away from the edges of the screen here. So we're literally just going to grab our sky lines and shift them up just a tiny bit, just to compensate for that. Okay, that looks pretty good. That's going to then go on forever. So we can drag that element back out again and collapse down our sky lines. I don't want this to happen for all of them though. For the moon, for example, I'm just going to have that slowly drifting over time. So what I'm going to do is grab my moon lines layer. I'm going to grab the pick whip and I'm going to pick whip that to the moon. And what that does is makes it follow it so that every time I rotate the moon, then the lines will rotate with it as well. I'm going to have to grab my pan behind tool and move this element over here to the center of our moon shape if I wanted to rotate the entire composition. Alternatively, because it is a pre-comp, we can come inside here and we can start editing these things individually. That way we don't have to worry about the, the pinning, the pick whipping of the moon lines. Wow, sorry. I've had a lot of food. I'm very slow-minded today. I can't really think or talk. So what we can do then is grab our grain layers, not necessarily the top mask, but maybe grab our grain layers and pick whip them to the bottom moon, and then we can just see what spinning that does. There you go. So that will rotate the whole thing for us. So we'll grab our rotation, and again, we'll just do time times maybe 5. See what that's look like. That's nice. That's like a nice slow rotation. And if we go back using tab to our background layer and we scrub through that, we can see that that revolves nice and slowly without affecting the moon lines. What you could do if you wanted to is do rotation on here, time times -5, which should rotate them in the opposite direction. So you can see now if we turn off adaptive resolution so it doesn't chop in quality, and we scrub, you'll see that the lines are actually rotating in the other direction. So if we were to pre-render that, just saying quarter quality, you can see the lines are rotating one way, whereas the globe is rotating the other, which is really quite cool. All right, sweet. So that's the happy with that moon rotation there. What I'm going to do is have these trees now. We're going to work on the trees. So let's go up to our trees composition, double click inside of that. What we are going to do is actually, let's go back up a level to the background and we'll grab our tree line layer. We'll cut that and we'll pop it inside the actual trees composition. And the reason for that is so that we can start to mask these off and have them animated individually from each other. Okay, so what I'm going to do is grab all these layers and I'm going to pre-comp it, and I'm going to call that trees left, and then we're going to mask the left half of this composition. We'll duplicate that with Control D, and then we'll change the mask we just made to subtract. And that will bring out the other half of our lines there. Then we can just hit P, keyframe both P positions. Let's move over to about, let's move over to the 20-second mark. And then we can just shift these off screen a little bit, just as if we were zooming in. Then we can scrub through, see if we're happy with the speed of that movement, which I think we are. And if we go back up a layer to the background and scrub through, we can see that over time, those trees look like it's zooming in a little bit. Oops, I rather foolishly left the vines out though, so we'll grab those vine layers too. We will cut that, go to the trees layer, paste it here just to make sure that it's correct. We'll cut that again, and then inside this composition, we'll paste it. We'll make sure they're underneath everything else. And then when we go back up to our background layer, those vines will then move with the trees as they come outwards, which is pretty great. So let's do the same thing to these plants then. We are inside our background here. We're just going to grab the stalks layers all the way through down to all the other leaf layers too. And we can pre-compose that and call this plants. And then inside plants, by double clicking, we can start to work here. So you can see that viewing your overall composition is obviously going to put a lot of strain on your computer, but whilst you're working inside these little pre-comps, these individual elements of rough and edges aren't going to cause too much strain. Let's grab all of our leaves and pick quick them to the stalks. Grab all of these leaves and pick quick them to the stalks. Then we can position keyframe both the stalks and the stalks copy. Let's go to the first frame here, the last frame, and we can just move them over a bit, and then that should move all of the plants, which is pretty good. Nice. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to use a wiggle expression to just help wiggle the rotational value of these leaves to see it as if they're like blowing in the wind a little bit. So we're going to grab our leaf copy, make sure we know what leaf this is we're working on first of all. And we're going to change the anchor point of that by clicking and dragging over to this layer here. If you want to as well, you can just quickly mask, so you can change your anchor points. So that when you select the layer, it just appears by its edges down here. So it's a bit easier to control and manage. Then we're going to bring up our rotational value. We're going to Alt-click the rotational keyframe, and we're going to type in wiggle, open brackets, and then for now, we'll just type 1,10. Then when we click away and scrub through, you can see that that's going to wiggle randomly on the rotational value as it moves away. Let's see what that looks like. So in real time, that's actually not too bad. I quite like that. So that's really easy to duplicate. We'll just copy this code. We'll grab our other two leaf layers. So we'll hit R, Alt-click them, and paste that piece of code in. A quick way to see whether or not your expression has been applied is to check the color of your numbers. If they're red, then they're done by an expression. If they're blue, then they're not. So again, then we know we need to just paste that in there as well. And now all of our leaves, oops, I didn't do those rotational points. All those leaves will be affected randomly by that wiggle expression. So I will quickly just fix these leaves anchor points so they don't wiggle all over the place. We'll turn off snapping for now so that we can more accurately position our required elements. And then we'll just reapply those. Alt-click, paste, Alt-click, paste. And that looks a little bit better. Now they're moving quite a bit for me. And what this is doing is using these figures that we punched in here. So we have every 1 second, wiggle it 10 increments, which in this case would be degrees. So for this, sorry, this is the bottom leaf, isn't it? I'm going to leave that bottom leaf on because where it's vertical, those 10 degrees actually impact it less. Where this one's horizontal, those 10 degrees look like they impact it a lot more. So if we just reduce that down to say 5, like so, they'll wiggle a lot less now. Well, they'll wiggle the same amount, but with less intensity. Okay. So let's do the same thing to these other leaves. We'll just have to come in, make sure we're on the right layer, change that anchor point, and do that for all three. There you go. That's pretty good. We can bring up the rotational symmetry for all of them. Alt-click them and paste that in. This one, I'm going to do all of them a little bit smaller. We're going to do wiggle 1,4 because it's a smaller plant. There we go. So they're all wiggling quite nicely. And then should we wiggle the stalks as well? I think we should. So if you want to do that to the stalks as well, you can see that if I were to select this layer and move the pan behind tool like we did before, it's going to create a strange line that follows that. And that's actually because we've got these positional keyframes already on here. So it's going to affect that and move those across the canvas, which obviously is not what we want. A few ways to fix this. I find quite a nice way is to hit Control-Shift-Alt-Y, which creates you a new null object. And then you can use this null object with the move tool and position the top left of that where you want the anchor point to be. You can then select your stalks layer and whip it to that null object. And then that null object will become your new anchor point. Okay, that will be for all of those layers, however, so that was going to rotate the whole thing. So the alternate way to do that is to just delete your keyframes and remove that anchor point. Sometimes you can select all your keyframes and move the pan behind tool, and that will stop it from working as well, but it doesn't seem to be working this time around. So we can delete our null like so. We can take our stalks. We could select both keyframes, make sure our cursor playhead is over one of them. And then if you move the pan behind tool, it shouldn't do that. It is, I don't know why. So since it's literally only 2 keyframes, I'm just going to delete that second one for now. Move the pan behind tool to where I want, get my position, and just remove that position. And then we've got everything working as intended. Bring up that rotational tool, Alt-click, and choose Wiggle 1,4. And that will wiggle those as well. Looking pretty good. Okay, let's do the same thing for this stalk copy. We'll delete our second keyframe. Grab our first one, move the pan behind tool. Reapply by moving. Alt click on your rotational keyframe with the shortcut R. Wiggle 1. Let's do 5. Slightly bigger. All right, that looks pretty good. So if we hit tab and go back up to our background, we should be able to preview all of that animation. So I'll just quickly RAM preview that and we can take a look. Okay, so here we have our RAM preview in quarter resolution. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. Obviously, the grain isn't that large. It's just because we're looking at it in quarter preview. We can see that our plants drift gently in the wind. We've got our sky background wobbling around. We've got our moon rotating. Our moon rotating ever so slowly, and that's all good to go. Now, as you can see, this is going to put quite a strain on your computer. If I were to try and RAM preview this in full mode, it's going to get a bit crazy. It's just like, no, can't do it. It's too much. So one thing I like to do, if we just hit tab to go back up to our main menu here, what we can do is just export our background. Okay, so one way to make sure it doesn't RAM preview it whilst you're working is to hide that. You might want to see what your character looks like whilst you're editing it, what it looks like on your background, yeah? Not just in this black void. So one way to do that is just to hide all of your layers, show the background, and then just quickly export this video. Now, I don't need it to be the fullest quality. So we're not going to export as just a full render, AVI render. We're going to drag and drop our composition into a media encoder. And we're going to just export a quick MP4. So I'm going to go to my project. I'm actually just going to export just the background composition. So up here, I'm going to drag BG over to media encoder and release. And that's going to pop it in the queue for us. We can then make sure we've got the right settings. I'm going to choose, I'm actually going to choose what I think is already on there, which is high efficiency video codec, H.265, MP4 that creates 17 megabytes, that's fine, and leave all these sort of settings as they are. And we can just quickly render that into our project document. And what we'll do is we'll just hide our background composition. And when we come to render the finished thing, we can just hide the video instead and show our background composition. That'll ensure we get the highest quality upon export. For now, though, we're just going to quickly re-render this and replace it. So whilst this is rendering, I'd like to reintroduce you guys to Phoebe. Hello, baby. She's come to say hello. That's it. There you go. Cause some trouble. You like to get in the way, don't you, baby? See, it's probably going to take a while, this render, because I'm recording the screen. No, darling. Anyway, back to it. I'll skip past this bit. No, you can't, because you're going to press something bad. All right, off you go. Okay, so whilst that renders out in the background, we're just going to try and see if we can carry on here so that I don't spend all night just waiting. We're going to take a look at animating our little character now. So we've done all of our background. I'm just going to hide that for the sake of brevity. And I'm going to turn on this transparency mode here just so that we can see every aspect of our character, like the trunk shadow, which is what we're going to be animating first. Let's grab our trunk shadow layer. And we basically want to make sure that we're going to be mimicking this kind of flickering light, which is coming from the flame here. We've mimicked all the flickering light with our animated grain, but this is going to be static, which isn't what we want. So I'm going to grab my pan behind tool and I'm just going to drag the anchor point of this to where I think the back edge of the log will be. Okay. Then we're going to see if we can take our scale options by hitting S and just unlink them like so. So that when we start to squash and stretch this, later on we can see we can operate those parameters individually. So I'm going to pop a keyframe on scale. I'm also going to see if I can pop a keyframe on rotation as well by hitting R. And then I'm going to press U to bring both of these up. Now I'm going to go over to about 2 seconds. Let's just hide everything apart from the trunk as well. Whilst we're doing this, so that we can nice and quickly see some stuff that's going on there. About 2 seconds in, we're going to pop another set of keyframes, which will return this sort of shadow to normal. And then at 1 second, we're just going to squash and stretch these just a little bit Maybe even just, 1 or 2 degrees. Just so that it starts to morph in shape a little bit, okay? Let's also rotate it maybe 1 degrees. And that creates a nice little flicker that we can loop, okay? We're also, however, going to add a roughen edges, don't worry, not an extreme one, to this shadow. We'll maybe push the border up to about 50. Oh, that's way too much, actually. 20? Yeah, 20 is good. And then we'll affect the evolution of this as well so that flickers, okay? Evolution, we'll just hit time times maybe 10. It should make it go pretty slowly. And let's see what that looks like. Maybe it's going to have to be faster than that. Loads faster. There you go. That's much better. So that's going to flicker as it grows and shrinks. That's pretty good. So let's grab all these keyframes. I'm going to hold Alt and I'm going to squish these down a little bit. Maybe to 1 second. That's pretty good. Yeah. Then we're going to just copy these last 2 sets of keyframes. We can copy them all. Doesn't really matter. And then pressing Control-Shift right, we're going to move along 30 frames or so and paste them. And keep doing that. Now, again, you could loop this if you wanted to. I'm going to press Alt, Shift, and Left there because I went a bit too far. But I think it's just fine to just sort of do this, repeating keyframes for this section. Because there's no point for a script. We know that that's what we want. It's looping. We're happy with it. It's good to go. We can then collapse that down, and that's our trunk shadow, nice and animated. Let's show our trunk lines and see if we're happy with all of this. Well, I don't really want it to be normal mode. Let's see what soft light looks like. That's a little bit better. Oops, sorry, that's the trunk shadow. That looks a little bit better, and we'll reduce the opacity of that to about 80. Yeah, that looks good. All right, awesome. So that's our trunk animated. So we can hide that for now because we're not going to be looking at it again until we're done. So let's bring in all of our characters and see what bit we want to animate first. Now we're going to tackle the flame last because I've still got to figure out how to do that bit. So let's take a look at animating these legs. I want them to sort of just bounce happily. To do that, however, we should probably set up the rig for this character first. And what that means is just connecting certain elements to other elements of his body. For example, his arms are going to be attached to his body. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. So we need to make sure that's reflected in our layers palette. So if we grab, let's collapse all of these with U just so that they're a bit smaller. If we grab the arm behind layer, before we add any keyframes, we can use pan behind tool and we can just move our anchor point to somewhere where we think the shoulder joint is going to be. Then we can use our pick whip tool to attach that to the body. Okay. Now the legs, I'm going to do something a bit unique with. We're going to use the mirror tool for that. So we're going to grab our pan behind tool. Yes. Grab the center axis point, but we're going to pop them here on this one leg, like so. Okay. We're also then going to mask out and adjust this mask that's already here by deleting some of these anchor points enough to hide this right hand leg. And we're going to use a mirror so that we only have to do the animation keyframes once. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. Mouth, blush, eye, brows, they all just need to be attached to the body. The lighter top needs to be attached to the body. The flames should all be attached to the lighter top, even though we're probably going to be redoing them. Arm, front, all. Let's grab the pan behind tool for this one. Grab our anchor point and pop it over on his shoulder. That looks pretty good. And then the lid we've already done from earlier. So that's pretty good. Let's pick whip this guy to the body and pick whip the lid complete to the body, like so. So now moving the body should move everything apart from the legs, which we've forgotten. Bam. That looks pretty good. Okay, so if we now hide everything but the legs, because we're going to work on that first. So the way I thought of doing it is masking out the one leg as we've done, and then just duplicating the layer in the same way that we did before, and subtracting our mask as well. Then on this one, we can move the anchor point to this other leg. Like so. All right, cool. Let's hide everything else that we don't need. And let's add a bit of bouncing animation to these legs. So let's take our first leg, bring up our rotation keyframes, probably the only one we're going to need. And I'm just going to have him maybe take 2 seconds. And he'll just lift his leg a little bit and settle in that spot. Now, this linear animation is probably going to look quite bad. So I'm going to hit F9 to bring up some easing and then go to my graph editor to edit the path. Now, if you don't see this graph, that's probably because you're seeing the value graph, which looks like that. We want to be editing the speed graph at the moment. I'm going to grab both of these by clicking and dragging, and that's going to bring up 2 little yellow handles. And I'm just going to drag that little yellow handle over this way. That's then going to change. We just hide that. Our animation path to go fast to slow, which is what we want. It's going to go whoop. I want it to hold here for just a second, maybe a full second, actually. Let's switch back to our keyframes. I'm going to copy this one, paste it in place, copy the first one, move over a bunch of frames that are about 2 seconds and paste it in place again. Now, at the moment, that's going to go fast to slow again. Let's see if that's what we want. And take a look. Go up, hold, back down. That's good, but the pause in between them is quite high. So I'm just going to go back to my keyframe view because I prefer it, and I'm just going to reduce that down. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to take a similar concept and apply that to the other leg. So we'll turn on this leg, turn on the body, just check that that doesn't extend too far, that the bottom of the leg starts to peek out. It does a little bit. So what we can do, since we don't have any position keyframes on this, is we can just eke that guy back upwards so that it doesn't quite cover up. Let's bring up rotation on here and keyframe that. This one went 14, so let's try this one as negative 14. See, that's a bit high, which I don't like. So we can reduce that, negative 3. That's not going to be a lot of movement, but that's okay. What we can do instead is shift this leg up a little bit, which will allow us to push that rotation a bit further. Negative 6. Keyframe negative 6. Go back to 0. Drag all of those, hit F9, go to our graph view, select the first 2, and do the same process as before. Select the second 2, do the same process as before. Let's hide our body and see what those legs look like. That looks pretty good. I don't like them working exactly in unison though, so I'm going to grab all of these keyframes. I'm just going to drag this a little bit along. Now they're going to move just slightly out of unison. The first one's going to move, then the second one, like so. That looks pretty good. So we can now just start looking at copy and pasting these. So we want them to pause just a little bit. Now, the reason I'm copy pasting these is because there's going to be then minor 2-3 frame variations between each thing. Okay. Which is what I want for this, because it's going to make it look a little bit more natural, a little bit less looped. And also, we want our animated grain to never loop as well. So if we were to have this looping, it would be because we trimmed it down to, say, like a 2-second duration, which means our animated grain isn't actually going to evolve any further past that particular thing. Whereas if we let it go all the way for the 20 seconds, that evolution is always going to be unique, essentially. So let's take a look at our legs now then. That looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's bring our body back in and look at it from the outside. Dragging out, moving back in, dragging out, moving back in. Okay, that's pretty happy with that. At the moment though, if we bring back in our trunk, See how he's sitting on that trunk? All the legs look a little bit too far over. So I'm just going to drag them back to the middle. Quickly check you don't see anything. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And I'm just going to reposition. So as you can see, like you really don't have to worry too much about moving things after your initial sketch. If they change, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Now the body itself, I'd like to move this pan behind down to the bottom. And now that we've animated all of this stuff to be attached to it, if I were to rotate this, let's change down to just third quality so that we can see what we're working with. If I were to rotate our body, everything else will move with it, okay? Which is totally fine. However, the legs we want to act as a separate entity. So now that we've animated the legs to our liking, we can unpin those from the body. And that means when we're rotating the body now, this will stay in place, okay? So to fix the animation for this then, what I want to do is maybe have him sort of bouncing up and down a little bit and swaying side to side a little bit as he's toasting his little marshmallow. So I'm going to do everything in roughly like 2 second segments so that when the rest of the animation is in there, it's going to all flow together and be set very similar to each other. So I'm going to grab my body all, I'm going to grab scale, I'm going to grab rotation, and I'm going to unlink scale again. Let's keyframe both of those, both scale and rotation. Move over to 2 seconds, keyframe them again. So let's take our height value, and don't worry, we're not going to squish him much. He's literally just going to squish down maybe 2%. He's going to rotate to the side, maybe 3%. Maybe that'll be 2% as well. As you can see, because it's attached to everything, it's got quite a lot of impact, even though it's only a 2% sway. After another 2 seconds, well, no, sorry, he'll pause a little bit as he gets there, won't he? Maybe that much. We'll keyframe again. And in this time, in about 4 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can edit these later on, doesn't matter. We'll have them rotate to -2. Actually, no, let's have that take 2 seconds as well, roughly. So we can go back to these keyframes and we can do 2 seconds exactly. That was just Control-Shift-Right, and that moves it 10 frames every time. Let's keyframe that exactly here, and we'll go to -2 here, which will rotate him the other way. Then we want him to pause for a little bit. But then we don't want him to go back to this first keyframe because that first keyframe is the settled one. Yeah, so he's going to shrink and he's just going to keep swaying. So what we actually want to do is keyframe these. And then we want to copy these keyframes and paste them, which will sway him back to the other side. Now we can grab all of these, copy, Control-C, because that's starting over on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, sorry. So I can copy all of these. I can move over a little bit of space here and paste them again. Okay, move over a little bit of space, paste them again, move over a little bit of space, paste them again. Then if you wanted to make this a seamless loop, you could probably do that and paste your first keyframes there, but the legs and stuff don't sync up anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Basically, I'm going to be cropping this at about 16 seconds. Okay, let's take a look at what that looks like. Round previewing is probably going to take a while because this is still exporting. So I'll drop it all the way down to quarter quality and I'll cut this out. Okay, so how does that look? He's swaying around. He looks pretty happy. Boop, 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 boop. It's really slow though. Let's speed that up loads. 2 seconds is crazy. What's wrong with me? Not too bad. So let's bring that out to about there. That's better. He looks a bit janky though, because the sort of movement pattern is not very eased because there's no easing. So we'll just hit F9 to ease those out. And I'm going to select all of these. Ooh, let me just delete this last keyframe over there, wherever that's come from. What's that doing all the way over there? There we go. Why is that now missing? It's because it's way off screen. So he's going to be rotation -2. -2 is fine. Just keyframe that. Let's grab these keyframes, go to our graph here, and I'm just going to pop them a little bit inwards. Just pop like that. Just gives it a bit more oomph. So he goes, yep, and he sort of sinks into it a bit more, and then we can look at that. There you go. That's what we like. Now his whole body's kind of got that nice little swaying motion to it. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we are now going to collapse that layer and our leg layers because we're happy with all of them. And we can hide all of this for now. Let's get rid of the arm behind and the trunk layer. So we've animated our trunk, we've animated our legs, we've animated our body. I'm going to take my mouth, blush, and eye layers now, and we'll look at animating these next episode because it's going to be some things like chopping and changing layers and frame-by-frame animation and that sort of thing. We'll do the same with the flame next episode too. But we'll animate the arms and the lid this episode. So let's take our arm behind layer and our body layer. And now, as you can see, that animation is already applied, so we can take a look at this arm. Now, as he sways, I'd quite like his arm to sort of every now and then just resettle itself. So we'll grab our rotation keyframe here, and we'll just have him sort of, as he's swaying this way, we'll have his arm sort of sink into his body a bit and settle. And then he'll go back out this way, and we'll have him sort of whoops, because we drew the rest of that hand. So if we go to full view mode, we can see we've got like a round curve there. So it doesn't really matter too much if it separates from the body. We could just leave it like just touching. So instead of -8, that's gone up to 7. And then as he comes back in this way, we can settle that back to 0. See what that looks like. Just a little bit of sort of bouncing, I suppose you'd call it, like a bouncing animation. Drag those keyframes in a little bit just to see like that. Let's have a look. Okay, so he's kind of sinking down there. Boom, settling. And then as his body rocks back this way, well, no wonder it's going slowly. We're watching it on full. There we go. Let's watch it on a slightly lower resolution. So every now and then, I don't want that every single time. Just every now and then he's going to go, there you go. That's good. So we'll just copy and paste that a few times in our whole composition. Now, let's take a look at the toasting of the marshmallow. Let's hide our arm behind and go to our arm front. So as like once or twice every 20-second loop of this, I want him to bring the marshmallow closer to his head. I want it to toast a little bit. And then as he pulls it away, I want it to untoast again. Maybe we'll actually just have it. He goes in once, he toasts, pulls away, still toasted. And we won't have this as a loop because that's a whole nother scene. And it doesn't make sense that it would untoast as it comes away. So we're going to use this outer composition to do the movement and the inner composition of the marshmallow to sort of toast and shrivel that up a little bit. Okay. So we'll have him rocking for a few seconds. And then maybe as this arm starts to animate for the first time, seems to make sense, and he starts to rock in this way, we'll have this arm front top. Let's just bring up our animation keyframes for the body. So just as he starts to rock in here, we'll bring arm front, or we'll grab our rotational keyframe. And as he rocks that way, we'll have this one shoot all the way in to start to toast a little bit. Let's grab our position keyframe as well. Press U to bring both of those up. And we'll also have him just shift up a little bit, just as if he's lifting his arm, just a touch, because you don't want that to be like his shoulder isn't attached. But as you can see, like we can lift and shrug our shoulders. And as you raise that, your shoulder would sort of naturally go up. So let's keyframe those. Grab both of these. If we zoom in a little bit, we can just add a nice whipping, like, what? Nice. Now that we've only done that once, it's going to remain there as he continues to rock, which is the benefit of all these layer linkings and stuff like that. So he's going to toast it up there. And then maybe we'll have him just rotate it a little bit as if he's like, just like toasting above his head. So maybe give him every 30 frames, every half second, we'll just have him waft it a little bit. That looks pretty good. We'll copy those, paste those. He's kind of going like wafting it around. There you go. And this is where it'll start to toast. Here. Shh. Let's keep him doing that actually for a little while. And we'll have it take quite some time to toast. Then we'll have him bring his arm back down again once it's done. Back to its original setting so we can zero out that. And I think we just did like one or two. Yeah, two shift downs there for position of his shoulder. For some reason, his body has stopped rotating, and that's because I just didn't copy these keyframes far enough. So we will do that now. I think I did that as 2 seconds, right? There we go. There we go. So he's still rocking back and forth. Good. So he's brought down that marshmallow. So let's take a point here where he's just started to bring it to the top, and let's go inside arm front all. Now inside arm front all here, we've got our marshmallow layer, our arm stick layer, and our arm front behind layer, as well as our thumb layer, which we won't do any animation with any of those. We will, however, animate our marshmallow. Now we could animate inside of here and change the colors, but that's going to get quite messy with all of these layers that we're working with. So I'm just going to go and animate this section here. What we will do is we'll grab our pan behind tool and we'll just bring that to the center of our marshmallow. And then we'll just roughly, with a bit of space, mask out this layer so that when we select it, the transform controls are a lot closer. All right, cool. So let's hit tab, go back to our Sketch 1920. And you can see that this goes from 5 seconds all the way through to about 10 seconds when he's toasting it. So we've got a marker point of sort of here. So for this marshmallow then, to make it shrivel up, we're going to grab our good old wave warp again and drag that over to our marshmallow. Now, immediately that's made it go a bit crazy. So what we'll do is we'll zero out both the wave width and height. And if we turn this on and off, you can see that doesn't really affect it at the moment. We'll make sure we're at sort of 5.5 seconds, which is the same place that our other keyframes started inside our master composition. And we'll also animate our scale a little bit. So we've got our scale. We're going to animate the wave height and width. And we'll just change the direction to be in line with the way this is going. I'm not sure if that's going to affect it, but we'll do it anyway. If we hit U, that will bring up all of those keyframes. And then about 10 seconds, we want that to be where the marshmallow stops shriveling. So I'm going to unlink scale and I'm going to sort of maybe go to 95% width and maybe 90% height. And that's going to scale that down a little bit. We might also have to edit position ever so slightly. So we'll just keyframe that position here and here. And we'll just do that so that we can make sure that shape is roughly aligned at the bottom there. So that as it sort of scales down and shrivels, we know that that's all good to go. Then, at the same place that this ends, we're going to just increase our wave height and width to about 5. Oh, God. 5 for the height and about, I don't know, 60, maybe 40 for the width. That's going to start to, that doesn't look like what I intended at all. And I think it's because you need the width to always be 40. And that's then just going to start to, yeah, there we go. As it really starts to shrivel up. We don't want it to sort of move though. We want that speed down to 0. There you go. So that's just going to start to shrivel. There's the setting I forgot, speed 0. Let's maybe start with a wave width of like 20 then, see what that looks like. Just going to, that is going to make it look like it's wobbling again. So we'll leave that up at 40 and it's going to shrivel, bam, like that. Okay, last step then is to change the color of that. So we're going to go to hue, light, saturation, and we're going to drag that onto our marshmallow as well. And then we're going to keyframe all of the things that we can, which is going to be our channel range. Then if we go to the end and we affect stuff, you'll see that it should have then created a movement through those colors through the hue, because we only just affected the hue as an example. What we're going to use is our hue, light, and saturation just to darken up this marshmallow a little bit. So we'll go back to this one here. We'll set this guy back to 0. I want to change our master lightness, increase the saturation so he burns a little bit, and we'll just eke this guy a bit more towards red, like so. That's a nice subtle change there, which looks pretty nice as it starts to shrivel. Then what we'll do is inside our marshmallow, we can go to our grain layer for this dark grain, and we can keyframe the color of our fill as well. So we'll do that at 5.5 seconds and 10 seconds. And we can just choose a nice darker toasted brown. And we'll do that as well for this white color. We'll keyframe the fill here. Keyframe the fill here as well. And we'll just make that one slightly yellow. That looks pretty good. I think I might be pushing it too far on that one though, so we'll just lighten that up a touch. We go back up a layer to arm front all. We can see that now, if we just expand all of these and hit F9 to give it a bit of easing, that's going to, over time, start to shrivel in both shape and color. Looks pretty good. So let's go back to Sketch 1920. And as you can see now, he'll be toasting, and he'll start to shrivel away and bring that toasted marshmallow back out. I don't like that dirty off-white color, actually. So we're probably going to fix that now. Let's go back inside our marshmallow. Where's he gone? Arm top all. Marshmallow. Let's change that master lightness back up just a little bit. Take that saturation down and just push that guy a little bit further. Oops, I accidentally did that over there. So we'll just drag that keyframe back over this one. That looks a little bit nicer to me. All right, cool. Tab will bring us back up to our Sketch 1920 layer. And we can scrub through just to see what we think. That looks pretty good. Brings it away toasted. All right, that's nice. All we've got left to do now is the flame top mid bot and the face of our character as well. So we'll definitely leave that for next time. But before we go, we'll quickly animate the tilting of this lid as well, because whilst this guy is following the body, if we were to rotate this entire section, you'll see that it'll rotate the hinge as well, which is not what we want. So we want to just make sure that we are aligned with one of our keyframe sections here. So we might as well just do it from the start. And as he tilts right, we want a slight delay and we want this guy to tilt right as well. So let's go inside of our lid complete, where we've got everything but the hinge. Okay, so I'm going to take the lid front and lid base, and I'm going to apply that to, sorry, I'm going to hit lid top and lid front, and I'm going to apply that, pick whip that to lid base. Okay, then when we rotate lid base, that'll rotate everything apart from the hinge, which is fine. We'll grab our pan behind tool and we'll shift that over to the hinge here on this section of the end, this end of the hinge. And then when we rotate, it's going to look like it's rotating a little bit better, which is good. Okay. However, it's going to start to extend past that hinge. We're not going to push it too far, actually. It's literally going to be no more than 5 degrees or so. So what we'll do to mask out these layers now is we'll just apply a little mask here. So you've got lid base, hinge, lid top. I'm going to take the hinge and drag that to the top because that should be on top of everything. And then I'm just going to pre-compose all of these rather than pick whipping them to each other. We'll just call this pre-compose. We'll just call it lid interior. That's good. That's still going to maintain all the stuff that we want. We're going to reapply that pan behind. We can, I think it was 7 degrees just to fix that rotation. Good. Now we can create a mask shape. So if we have no layer selected at all, and we just draw a shape where we want this lid to be visible, we can just make sure that line cuts through the hinge here, like that. Boom. Drag that guy here and just choose Alpha Matte Shape Layer 1. Now, when we rotate this dude, he's not going to appear below that hinge, yeah, which is quite good for us. So starting from the start, rotation, we'll go and make sure if we go back to our Sketch 1920 layer, we can go to our keyframe here, apply a second keyframe here. Now we know that that's lined up correctly. We can then go and rotate this guy until we're happy. About there seems to be good. Then we can go back up to this other layer, skip forward so we know that we're along the same lines again. Create a pause keyframe. Another 1 second over. And then this time, if we'll, instead of going back to what I thought was -7, which is the flat amount, we'll push it just a little bit further. And we'll also grab a position keyframe here and here, and we'll just shimmy that position down so that the lighter still remains connected without overlapping any elements that we don't want to see. Okay. Grab all these keyframes, hit F9, and we'll just tweak these a little bit. So we've now got rotating one way, rotating the other way. Boom, boom. Back up a layer. Navigate to the next section. Give us a little bit of room. So not lining up exactly, but it doesn't really matter. Then it's waiting here, and we want it to rotate back that way. So we've got the starting position, rotates one way, rotates back. We then just need to copy this rotational keyframe, go forward a second, paste that in place. So now we've got our section that we need to copy and paste to our heart's content. Let's take a look at that. So that rotates back and forth quite nicely. Let's watch it in third view so it goes a bit faster. That looks pretty good to me. So if we just keep copy and pasting this for just 1 second, so we've got all of the animation that we need. Boom. We can go back up a layer and see what that looks like in the whole thing. So we'll go down to quarter view and we'll just scrub through. So you can see that's slightly off timing to the main body, which makes sense because as it's moving that body over, the lid's going to like flick that way. Sorry if this has been a bit of a rambling tutorial. It's just hard to sort of think and do at the same time. So I'm kind of trying to explain this in a way that makes sense to me, but it's hard to do that and talk about it and do it. So just sorry about that. I'm trying to get better at that sort of thing. But for this time around, that is going to be everything that we need doing. So let's bring our character's legs back in, as well as our tree trunk and background. And we can roughly see what's going on here. He started to animate quite nicely. So next time, what we're going to do is replace our background. Now that it's finished rendering, we're going to animate the flames, and we're going to animate his face as well with some cool frame by frame animation. So thanks very much for sticking around this long. Apologies, it's been a bit rambling. There's kind of no other way to do it. Hopefully it's still interesting and useful for you guys. But otherwise, I'll see you next episode for some advanced animation and editing inside After Effects before the final episode, which will be neatening things up and exporting this guy and getting him ready for posting online. So thanks very much. I'll see you all next time on the next episode of Complete Intro to Motion Design on TipTut. Part 4, Finishing Touches in After Effects. Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut, and welcome to the final episode of Intro to Motion Design. So far we've created all of the basic animation for our little character here. You can see that he's sitting on his log, rocking back and forth. The camera slowly zooms in and he toasts a marshmallow, which goes from a nice crisp white all the way down to a shriveled brownish color. The last things we need to animate on this then are going to be his face and the flames. The reason I left these to last is because they're quite complicated and long-winded to do for themselves. So we're going to do the face first, and then we're going to take a look at doing some frame-by-frame animation in Adobe Animate and bring that over to After Effects for the frames for the flames on his head here. So without any further ado, let's just jump right in. So you can see here that we have our mouth, blush, eyes, and brows layers that we're just going to pre-compose and call face. And then we're going to pick whip this face composition to the body, just so that it continues to rotate with the rest of the body as we expect. And just to double check that that happens, we can just pre-render a few frames. Yeah, so we can see that that's rotating along with the body there. Perfect. So now we can drop inside our face. For this one, we can probably actually turn the background back to black, just so we can see a little bit easier what's going on with our face here. So first thing I'm going to do is delete one of the eyes, and there's a reason for this, trust me. We're going to use a mirror technique to mirror one of these eyes here, so that we only have to animate one of them and the other one will follow suit. The mouth, blush, and brows we're going to animate independently. In fact, the blush and the mouth aren't probably going to animate at all. The brows we're just going to have go like up and down, together. So a single layer for those is fine. So we're going to take our eye and go inside that composition. And inside this comp here, you can see that we've got 2 layers, the shading and the rest of this eye. So if we want to animate this properly, we're going to need to separate those out. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool. I'm going to alt click on this stroke box until the stroke disappears. And then I'm going to give the fill color the same color as the eye. I'm going to grab this roughly the center of our eye shape here. And clicking and dragging whilst holding Control and Shift, I'm going to draw a circle that's the same size. We're going to rename this one eye, and we'll just pop it below the 2 that we've already got, and we'll hide those. Then I'm going to duplicate this layer, rename that pupil, and I'm just going to scale it down a little bit. And I'm going to show the old pupil layer, and I'm going to eyedropper that to be the correct color, and then hide it again. We can then position this up in the top left, like so. But we can see that that's now overlapping our eye shape, being too out the other side of it. So we just need to duplicate our eye layer, drag that above the pupil, and turn the pupil's track matte to that eye layer, which then will cap it to that existing area. Then it's just a case of moving this pupil around a little bit. So we'll grab our pupil layer, we'll grab the position tool, and let's go maybe 1 second in and keyframe position. Move, say, half a second over, and just move that a little bit around. As he's kind of not doing much in the main scene, we don't really need to worry about his eyes following anything. So we're literally just going to add in some random small motion just to make the movements look natural. And they don't always have to take half a second. They could be maybe a slightly quicker movement if it's a shorter space. And then I'm just going to copy my first frame again so that we know that it loops back. I'm going to control click all these layers and then hit F9, and that will make them perfectly easy eased, which is what we want. In fact, if we grab all of these, we could probably pull out this handle so that it whips a little bit more. Motion wise, we'll look at that. Yeah, that looks good. Happy with that. Just going to open up my preview, cache before playback. Make sure that's turned on. Cool, that looks pretty good. So we can just copy these keyframes and paste them again to duplicate them. And then we've got some good eye movement throughout our entire composition. That looks pretty good. We're happy with that. So we'll go hit tab, go back up to our face layer, and we can see now that we've got our pupil moving throughout the composition. Now then, let's grab our mirror tool from the effects and presets panel by typing in mirror. And we can click and drag that over our eye. And you can see that over here, we'll get a small dot on the right-hand side. That's just going to be the center point of our mirror. So you want to drag that to a place until you get the eyes roughly the right amount of width apart that you want. So I'm going to say about there. Then we need to change the reflection angle in this case to just bring those eyes into alignment a little bit better, so that they're not, he doesn't look quite so boss-eyed, essentially. Drag that guy over. That looks pretty good. Maybe push that to 9 degrees reflection angle. There. So now we can see that we only have to animate that once and both the eyes are following in comparison to what we expect. Additionally, this also means that we can add some scale and stuff to this eye to basically make him blink. So we'll go over to here. We will select our bottom eye layer and we will pick whip our pupil and our eye2 layer to this, so that when we start to scale this up and down, everything else follows it as well. So I'll unlink the scale properties, and just after he moves, maybe about, let's have it be here, sort of 4.5 seconds in. I'm just going to keyframe the scale, move along half a second or so, and I'm just going to shrink down the height of the eye a little bit, maybe just to 95%. So he shrinks, and then we're just going to have the eye blink. So shrinking a little bit, and then in maybe say 20 frames, we'll have that scaled all the way down to something about here. That's going to move quite quickly. So let's say that's 40% and see what that looks like. That's pretty good. So we'll F9 that. We can then, actually, I don't think I like that slow into the quick. So we'll just delete that middle keyframe and it'll go all the way down. And then if we press Alt, Shift and left, we can drag those over a bit. Then we can take both of these keyframes here and make it go from fast to slow. Slow to fast, rather. That looks better, I think. We have our eye shrinking there, which is good. We can then select all 3 of our layers and hit Control-Shift-D, and that will split them. Pressing Control, close square bracket will push them above all of your other layers, and you can make sure that you're deleting the right ones then. That's going to have our eyes shrink down. We can then duplicate these layers with Control-D. Press U to make sure we're bringing up all these keyframes. We don't want that pupil animation there. And then we can bring these frames along, 1, 2, 3 frames after this keyframe, and hit Control-Shift-D to split them. And what that gives us is the eye closing, disappearing for a second, and then closing again. We also don't want it to be closing again, so we want to time reverse these 2 keyframes. Now that gives us the eye closing and then opening again. Not only does it do that, but it also means we maintain all of our timings for these pupil movements. So in that 3 frame gap, I'm just going to draw a new shape layer, which has a slight curve. It has no fill, but it does have a stroke that is the same color as the pupil. We will shift that down, press U to collapse it, and we'll cut that layer to just be the length of our 3 frames. But I don't like these harsh edges that we've got here on the edge of our line. I want them to be round. So I'm going to twirl this layer down, go to Contents, Shape, Stroke, and change that to a round cap, which just adds round edges. Now, if we watch this back, we've got our eye that closes, goes to the blink, and opens again. Why won't that play? Preview, come on. If caching, play cache frames. Is that it? No. Why is that not playing? It says it's playing. I run out of RAM or something? That's okay. I can scrub through for now. Don't know what's happening there. So we can have that shrink, goes to our other eye, opens up again. It's pretty good. And then we can just copy these keyframes again. Paste them over here when we want our second blink. What we could probably do is just 1, 2, 3, paste like so. Duplicate that layer and move it over to where that 3-frame pause is. Like so. And then split. And get rid of those 3. And then we've got it changing to that eye again and opening up again. Okay, so now when we go back to our face composition, we've got eyes that move around, blink, and blink again. Oops, I quite like that little blink, that's nice. Blink. Blink. Okay, it looks good. So now we just need to add some random brow movement. So we'll just grab the position of these eyebrows and we'll just have them shrink down with some basic easing. Maybe after a few seconds. Maybe as he starts to rise that stick to his flame at 5.5 seconds, he brings up his eyebrows again. And then lowers them back to the starting position with a copy and paste. And we can do all of that again a second time. And there we have our face animation. So we don't want that to go down to wireframes. We want adaptive resolution. He's going along. Maybe he'll blink. So at 5 seconds, he's doing a blink, which is nice. And then I think he does another one a bit later. Looking pretty good. Hard to see there because we've got so much going on. Easier to see inside of the face layer, obviously. He's blinking once or twice, moving his eyes around. Looks pretty good. Okay. Back up to our sketch layer then. So if we round preview all of this, we should see what we have so far, which should be everything apart from the flames animated. So let's hop back in once we've seen that pre-rendered. Okay, it's time for an After Effects hot tip. Turns out if you're pressing space and your RAM preview isn't working, it's probably because you're an idiot like me and your audio hardware changed. So I turned off my speakers, which caused the audio hardware to change, which caused them to be not working in After Effects, which means when I've got audio on in the preview, it doesn't RAM preview that. Now, I switch that to be correct in the preferences and it's working fine again. Okay, no worries. We'll RAM preview this and we'll see what we've got. Just thought I'd let you know what happened. Okay, so here we are with the RAM preview. That's looking pretty good, actually. I'm quite happy with that. What I might do is increase the speed of his blink a little bit. It seems to be a little bit slow for me. You can see here, I like the way the eyes move, and then the blinks are really quite slow. So we'll just speed up that blink, I think, and then we'll move on to the flames. So I'm just going to grab the first keyframe of each and Alt Shift it over by 10 frames just to speed up that little section there. Okay, looks pretty good. Let's save that. Go back to our Sketch 1920 layer, and it's time to work on these flames now. So I'm going to actually animate these frame by frame using Adobe Animate and then bring them back into After Effects. So it's time for what might be the greatest crossover event in TipTut history. You've probably already seen this tutorial, and it's because I was doing it for this very video, but I figured it would make a good tutorial by itself. So we're going to jump over to that. We're going to do that section, and we're going to come back, and then we're going to finalize everything for our finished motion design animation. So go. Let's look at how to animate some cool flame effects inside of Adobe Animate 2020. Let's do it.
TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut and welcome to this Adobe Animate tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at how to animate some cool flames inside of Adobe Animate 2020. So to get started, we're going to need to make ourselves a new canvas, and I've actually got a reference file here called flamesanimation.png. So we're going to bring that in. First step is to create a new canvas here. We're just going to make it 1080 by 1080 pixels. For this particular project, I'm doing 60 frames per second because it's for another project I need to integrate with that is also 60 frames per second. I recommend you use the more standard 24 if you're doing this, because 60 frames a second is a lot to draw. I'm shooting myself in the foot by doing it, but I've got to match it now. So I recommend 24 frames per second, and we can just hit create on that one. Not too many settings to set up there. Once we've got our canvas, we want to drag and drop our reference file in. If you don't have a reference file to follow along with this one, it doesn't really matter. You just need to draw your first frame. So I'm just going to hold Control and Shift whilst pressing Q initially to scale up my flame here. And then I'm just going to hit F8 and turn this into a symbol called flame, just so that I can reduce the opacity of this, which you do over in the properties panel by clicking alpha and then dragging that opacity down. We can then lock this layer later on, but I would just like to start off by saying, if you haven't watched my intro to Adobe Animate series, which I will link for you in the description and on screen now, I recommend you go and do this because there's going to be a few things I skip over, but if you're happy to kind of just follow along, you should be able to do it without watching that anyway. So without any further ado, let's just jump right in. First thing we need to do is go up to our timeline layer here and decide how long we want our animation to be. I think 1 second is fine. So I'm just going to click over on my 1 second option here, and I'm just going to hit F5. And that's going to introduce a bunch of copied frames so that when we scrub along our timeline here, this flame remains constant on screen for a second. We're then going to add a few layers on top of that. 3 should do for now. And we'll just name those bot, mid, and top, as if we were playing League of Legends. We want a new frame for every drawing of these. However, this is where we're going to introduce the roughs. Oh, I'm thinking of that. Let's add a new layer called rough, actually. So I'm going to select all of these frames on the rough layer, and I'm just going to hit F7, which populates that with a bunch of blank keyframes. Then I'm going to select the first one of these frames. And over on my canvas, I'm going to press Shift and B to bring up this really cool new vector brush over here, this fluid brush tool, which has a lot more options than the normal brush tool inside of Adobe Animate. So we need some colors to work with. So what I'm actually going to do is grab our original layer here, select our symbol and just drag that opacity back up. Then on a new layer, which I'm going to call palette, and drag below the roughs. I'm just going to eyedropper some of these colors, and with the blob brush tool, I keep calling it the blob brush tool, with the fluid brush tool, we're just going to paint ourselves over a little palette in the corner. So I'm just hitting I and then Shift B to bring up these colors that we require. And these are just for reference really, because obviously you can change them later on, but make sure you just get the colors that you're happy with. I'm going to select my dark red then. I'm going to click my symbol again and just reduce that opacity down. And really we only need this layer here for the first frame. So what I'm going to do is just lock it. And then grabbing my blob brush tool with Shift B, I can start editing these settings over on the right hand side until I get a brush that I'm happy with. Now this is what I've determined I'm happy with. It might need to be a bit smaller for this particular project. So I'm just going to drag that down to a nice even 10, if I can do so. There we go. That's just going to make a nice solid line. Now I've dragged the stabilizer all the way up. If I remove it, you can see exactly what happens. It kind of smooths out everything that you need to make your lines a little bit smoother. There's also curve smoothing, which smooths any sort of rounded shapes here. Roundness is affecting obviously the roundness of the brush, so it makes it a little bit more calligraphy style if you drag that all the way down. Angle and is to do with your angle of your pen. If I bring that into camera there, like so, how much it respects you tilting the angle. Taper is how much you want your brush to sort of close off. So you can see here that taper all the way up makes this nice spiked ending. Taper all the way down makes a nice round edged brush, which is what I want for this one. And then yes, we do want pressure to be applied. So I'm just going to delete all of those by selecting that frame and hitting delete. Then using the Control+ tool, I'm going to zoom in and we're just going to create ourselves our first frame. And we're just mainly using this one for reference. So we want it to get close enough to the original, but not worrying too much because obviously we're not going to be using the original at all. It's just for reference. Now I find it best to work with your outlines first and then come and fill later on. I also find it best to work thinking about one shape at a time. Okay, so we can fill that in with K and then Shift B to go back to our normal brush. So at the moment we've got zoom size with stage on. So what that does is I'll show you if we currently draw with Shift B a single line like so, and then we zoom out and draw a single line, it maintains that size. If we check that off and we draw a single line and then zoom in and then zoom in again, you can see that that becomes thinner and thinner and thinner depending on how far we are zoomed in or out. Now, that's just personal preference, how you'd like to work. I like to actually leave that on so I know that I've always got the same size brush regardless of where I am and what I'm doing, how far zoomed in or out I am. So I'm just going to take my rough frame here. And basically, so long as you keep this guide layer underneath your shapes visible, so if I just go to hide that, as long as you keep this layer visible and you make sure that your last frame starts to move back towards this shape, then you'll have a perfectly looping animation as well. So that's what we're going to try and do as we move forward through this shape. However, at the moment, you can see that I can't actually see the previous frame that I've just drawn. If I press comma and full stop, I can move back and forth in my frames with the keyboard, but we don't have onion skin turned on. So that's just this little symbol up the top here. We can just turn that on. And you can see that once it's checked and we draw a new shape on our second frame, our previous frame will be onion skinned with a certain color. If you want to go to the onion skin options, you can right click on that and just choose advanced settings. And you can do things like choose the range of frames that want to be shown. So it's previous to, next to, how opacityed, how much see-through there is basically, and how little their see-through is, and whether or not you want to show keyframes or anchor markers and all this other stuff. And you can adjust the range like so. You can also choose whether you just want to see outlines. Now, outlines for this one might be quite useful, so that's what I'm going to leave on. Okay, so I'm going to close off my onion skin settings. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and I'm going to start to see how I want to move this shape. Now, it's obvious here to me that this shape's kind of pulling itself upwards. That brush is quite large, actually. I'm just going to bring that down. There we go. Yeah. So this shape seems to be pulling itself upwards. This section seems to be kind of like in a swooping motion, and this section seems to be coming out and swooping like that. So that's what we're going to try and replicate in our animation here. Basically, it's just a case of seeing where and how your flame is going to be moving. So we can see at the moment that the bottom of this flame here, if this blob were to start pulling upwards, that's going to be pulling some of this flame away. So it'll be thinner at that section. And then in the next frame, it will be slightly taller there. Okay. Again, this section will be slightly thinner because this frame is going to be pulled up further. Same goes for here. Slightly thinner, and taller. And same goes for there. I'm just going to grab my eraser tool and erase that ruined bit, which I did quite badly. And then fill out this section. and then K will fill that in for me. That looks pretty good. So we can move on by pressing full stop. And you can see now that we've got our two different frames here. So again, we can start pulling this one in a bit thinner. This time it's going to start to rise even further out. This one's going to be pushing itself even further up, which makes that bit even thinner. Same goes for this section here. A bit thinner again. And then this bit I want to keep fairly solid along the bottom because you want some kind of rigidity. Pressing K will fill that. And you can start to see already how this is going to move. Okay, it's starting to grow out. Now for this particular one, I wanted the fire to look a little bit liquidy, but if you wanted it to be a bit more spiky, you know, with spike tips like so, then there's no reason you can't do that. So basically that is the process. I'm just now going to go through and do all of this base layer, and then I'll get back to you guys at the end of that time lapse. So as you're going through your animation here, you might start to notice that it feels like it's coming to a conclusion much earlier naturally than you expected. Like for example, here I'm only on frame 10. I need to be frame 60 before it starts to loop around. But I've already had my shapes break away from the main block here, and it feels natural that it would start to bring this little lump back in to start to re-loop these elements. If that happens to you, not to fret. You can basically say that you're going to add more in-betweens between these to change the speed of the animation to make it slower and smoother transition between those different frames. That'll make sense in a second when I get to doing that bit, but thought I'd just let you know that if you're experiencing this as well, it's not really an issue. You can fix that later on. Okay, so I feel like I've reached the natural end of my animation here, but as you can see, as the first shape here starts to move back towards this shape from the beginning, we're left with all these sort of extra shapes here that don't quite finish their natural movement before it's supposed to loop. And the way you can fix that is by moving the tail ends of these natural shapes to the start of the animation as well, because it's going to be seamlessly looping. There is no actual start or end. So what you can do is copy these shapes with Control C. Oh, sorry, I have one more frame there. So we'll just quickly do these last frames. And copy these shapes instead. So grab these elements. It's mainly this larger blob here, but we'll take them all. So using the lasso tool, which is L, just grab all these elements and copy and just paste them on the layer above for now with with paste in place, which is Control Shift V when you're inside of Adobe Animate. And as you can see, then you can start to blend these two frames together if you needed to. So let's shift them over frames so we can use them as a reference for our first frame. And they're going to be slightly further ahead on each of these, maybe getting ready to disappear. So that one's going to be like this. This larger one over here, like that. And that'll probably do. Then if you need to, you can delete this above frame and you should be able to see the remnants of your last frame here, and you can just carry on animating them straight ahead like normal. Fill out that with K, Shift B. This one here. Move over a frame, do the last little bits. There. Now you should have that looping. So starting off, expanding, and then starting again. So if you want to see how that loops, you can turn on the looping options here and just drag that looping to the frame limits that you want and just hit play. And you can see that we're starting to get this kind of bursting motion there, which is quite nice. However, this only fills a third of a second and we want it to fill a full second. So what we're going to do to make sure this loops properly and to use it as the basis for the rest of our animation as well, we're going to drag this last frame over here. Probably helps if we clear the rest of these spare keyframes like so. And we're just going to then space out these 20 frames into the 60. So how many do I actually have? This is on frame 19. So if we give each of these 2 keyframes in between them, or in this case, 1 keyframe in between them, that will space them out in between the timeline. We can then hit F7 between each of these. And this gives us just 2 frames that we can create a tween for. So if we change our advanced onion skin settings to only show 1 frame previous and 1 frame after, why is that not going to 1? Is it because they're locked together? 1, 1. Next 1. Come on, there we go. 1 frame previous and 1 frame after, we can now see quite clearly where those 2 changes will be. And we just simply draw the in-between. So we just do that. This creates a longer, smoother animation and fits it in between the amount of frames that we want. So let's do that. Okay, and there you have our first looping section of the fire. Now, the other segments for the orange and the yellow are the exact same process. I'm not going to bother showing you that. I'm just going to jump right ahead to where it's completed now, and you can see the finished product. And there we have it, our completely finished looping fire animation. Really simple to do, frame by frame. Make sure that your first frame matches your last frame and you're good to go. Okay, so here we are back in After Effects. Now it's time to import what we just made in Animate. So I'm just going to hit Control and I, and I'm going to grab my animateflames.fla. That's the source file. The FLA is the same as sort of the PSD in Photoshop terms. You want to save your imported files to a folder somewhere, so make sure that that is local to you and will be able to be seen by the After Effects software. And that's going to be very similar to when we imported our Photoshop file at the beginning. It'll create a folder with all of our assets, one for each layer, and a composition inside of which there will be a SWF file, which represents the piece of animation per layer that you just made inside of Adobe Animate. Now, I noticed the bottom of this kind of jumps a little bit, which I'm not a massive fan of, but I don't have time to go back and fix that. Just to let you guys know that that's there, and I'm not particularly happy with it. Once this is brought in, however, it's really simple to just pop into our animation. If we go back to our Sketch 1920 layer, and we've got flame top, mid, and bot. What I'm going to do with those is I'm just going to pre-compose them, call them flames, and we're going to pin those flames to the lighter top like usual, and then go inside. Now, the reason we do that is so that we can grab our animated flames layer, sorry, it's hard to say, and then just roughly scale it down and position it to replace the general positioning of our previous layers. So scale this guy down, pop him in place, and then hide these 3 layers because we don't need them anymore. To extend that work area out. So this has only got about 16 seconds in length. That's fine though, because our original layer here, we're probably going to be limiting to about 16 seconds anyway. In fact, let's take the time to make it 15, and we can trim our composition to that layer. We'll do that last though. So at the moment now we can see that our new animated flames will be following our previous motion, apart from they are now animated, which looks quite nice. So we just need to add our noise back into these separate layers as well now, because they're obviously, they don't have that noise because we didn't create that in Adobe Animate. So that is attached. It is animating the full length of what we want. I'm sort of happy with the position, but what I'm going to do is just reposition this outside containing composition. And what we can do actually to fix that jagged bottom that we didn't really like is we can mask out just roughly, if we go and give it a bit of breathing space, we could mask out the bottom of this overarching composition with a subtractive mask that has a feather of, say, 5 pixels, maybe 10 pixels. And that'll stop that janky bottom edge from showing too much. If we give it maybe a feather of 20, there you go. That makes it look like it's growing out of that spout there, which is quite nice. And that solves our janky bottom edge problem. So there you go. Back inside our flames layer then, we just need to go to one of our subcomps, the marshmallow one will do, and copy one of our grain layers. And actually, let's not use the marshmallow one because that's got keyframes on it that we don't want. So let's just take this layer here from our arm and go back to our flames composition here. We can probably look at this in full quality preview and paste in our random grain effect, from which we will delete the mask and we're left with our previous grain. So same thing as the first part of this tutorial. Going to grab that base color, choose a darker color of it here. Maybe something like that. Probably should be grabbing that from my color palette actually. So I'm just going to search for that in my project panel, which I now obviously will never be able to find. If we go to Sketch 1920 layers maybe, and then it should be near the top somewhere. Palette, is that it? Yeah, there we go. Let's do it properly. Might as well do it properly. Let's grab our grain layer and eyedropper this dark color. There we go. Drag that to the bottom for now. So we've got our grain now on our correct color. This darkish purple looks quite nice. Just going to drag that over our flames like we did before. Pop it on top of flame bot, duplicate flame bot, drag that above the grain, and you'll see that it's already started to crop that color off for us, so that when we grab our mask tool like we did before and we mask off this shape, it's going to create some really nice grain for us here. Go down to our mask, feather that by about 100 pixels, maybe 200. And we're actually just going to move the whole thing down. That looks pretty good. So now we want flame bot showing. We want the grain showing, but the mask for the grain hidden. Then we want this guy showing and this top guy showing as well. Now, why flame mid has got some of that grain showing through, I don't know. That'd be because that's the original animated layer there, which I've done wrong. Never mind. This isn't the animated one at all. Let's grab that grain layer and cut that. My mistake, sorry. And we'll just pop it inside our animated flames layer, which is the layer we want to be working on, composition rather. Going to grab my palette too, going to pop that inside animated flames. And this time it'll actually work. So we grab our flame bot, we duplicate that, pop it above the grain and maneuver the grain layer into position like so. And there we go. You now see it working as intended. I will, however, now adjust these settings, maybe make the mask so like a 600 pixel mask. That looks pretty good. And drag out the mask area because this is obviously going to animate and change. We want to make sure it covers the entire thing. So then as that goes through, we're going to see our grain animate. Perfect. Okay, let's do the same thing then with the rest of these layers. So we want to duplicate our grain layer, pop that above flame mid, duplicate flame mid, pop that above grain, and then show our bottom flame mid. That's pretty good. Let's bring our color palette on screen so that we can change the color of this grain. Was originally this orange, which makes it the same. So we'll make it this kind of darkish color here. And we'll just grab that grain layer and we'll just bring it down a little bit like so. That looks good. So again, we'll duplicate that grain layer, place it above flame top, duplicate flame top, place that above the grain, show that bottom grain. Then take this guy here, shimmy him up all the way to the top. And this time we're going to accent with white, maybe this off-white color. And we'll just reduce the opacity of this overall layer to about 40, maybe 60. That looks pretty good. And now we can see that that's going to be just animating the brighter elements as opposed to the darker elements of this flame here as well. Pretty happy with that. You could go further and add obviously brighter elements on the orange here, but I quite like the fact that the darker part here is kind of the only grain shaded bit that you actually see. So we'll just quickly RAM preview that and then we'll take a look to see what it looks like at full speed. All right, so there's a couple of seconds of that RAM previewed. Looks pretty good to me. I really like the way it looks actually. So we'll pause that, we'll save, and we'll drop back to our main composition here where we can see it take place. Now, why isn't that showing up? Let's find out. It's because we have accidentally hidden that animate flames layer, which is not great. And there we go. We can see it coming in now. Now, this is the finishing touch that's going to add quite a lot of actual movement to our little dude here. As it moves and shifts around, however, it does look like, yeah, the lid there is going behind these flames. That's not correct. We want that lid complete to be below the flames layer. But we want the arm to be in front of it. Yep. It does look like we're going to have to just slightly adjust the position of that as well. Like so. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I think we might be somewhere close to done. So let's RAM preview this guy, have a look at what he looks like, and then get him exported. Okay, so just RAM previewed a few seconds, and I think this looks really good actually. Our guy's bouncing around, he's looking quite happy. There's quite a lot of nice movement going on in here, but one thing I will think I'd like to add is some animation to these vines, just have them swaying left and right, just because that overall part of the scene looks a little bit static still. So that's the final thing we're going to do. I think I popped those inside our background layer and then inside our trees layer, which was then duplicated. So we've got trees left and then this other trees left one here. So if we animate inside this one section, it will do both of them for us. Now we have our vines composition, which helps us because if we drop inside this, we can see we've got our animated grain on here, as well as our original vines underneath and the grain layer on top. If we move this vine layer, it's going to affect the grains layer too. So the best way to do this then might be with some kind of adjustment layer. Now, I've not done this yet, so this could all go horribly wrong. Let's try Control-Shift-Y to, so that is a new solid. What is the composition for layer new? Adjustment layer, Control-Alt-Y. So Control-Alt-Y will affect everything beneath it. Let's then do a, actually, no, let's not do an adjustment layer. Let's do a null. Control-Shift-Alt-Y to create a new null. Then let's parent all of these shapes to this null, meaning that whatever we do to the null, the rest of these shapes will do too. So before we parent that, we'll just position the null sort of somewhere up here in the middle. Reparent all of those. And now I just need to skew this null a little bit. So what would be the best way to do that? Vertical scaling, width scaling could work. There's probably a way to rotate or skew this with some kind of effect. If we go to effects and presets, maybe skew. Is that something? No. What about warp? Mesh warp, warp stabilizer, wave warp. Can we do the classic old wave warp here? Would that work? Probably not, no. Okay, let's see what we can do with a combination of subtle rotation and scale keyframes here. So at the start, let's scale and rotate these. Let's say it takes a second to go one way. So let's have them rotate maybe 2 degrees one direction, but scale back down the height by about 5. Because my worry is obviously these are going to start appearing behind the trees. So we might be able to fix that. So that's going to have them waving one way quite nicely. It looks all right. So we'll have them take a second or so to reach that apex by just adjusting these keyframes. So they'll go quite fast. So let's have that take 2 seconds actually. So it really slows down and then it waits a second and then reverses itself all the way to the other way. So it would go to rotation of -2. In the middle of that, it would reach 100, 100 again before going back down to 195. And then that would just go through 0. So we don't need to keyframe that. See what those look like. We'd have to have it speed up the rotation, but the scale to sort of swing like so. That looks pretty good. So we can copy these keyframes now, and after a second pause, paste them, and then time reverse them. So they swing back the other way. So it swings, swings, swings. Let's take a look at that swing. That looks pretty good, actually. So let's take all of these and paste them a few times. Now, my only concern is whether or not these are going to come off of the tree, but it doesn't look like they do. So that's pretty good. All right, great. Let's look at that on this trees level. RAM preview the first maybe 3 or 4 seconds and see what that looks like in real time. So it rests, comes through for 1 second, swings back the other way. And it would stop at 5 seconds. Good. So let's have a look. Yeah, that adds a lot of nice movement, actually. I really quite like that. All right, great. Save. Let's export this guy because we are done. Now, one thing I remember I did do was I exported this background as a video and then didn't replace it. It was just so that it helped with RAM previews and stuff on weaker systems. So if I just navigate now to the folder, Complete Intro to Motion Design, and go to the Adobe Media Encoder, we see we've got this background file here, which is just by itself. Now, obviously, this is now outdated, but just because I remember, the only thing I was going to do was drag that in to After Effects here into our project folder. And then once it figures out what we want, and hopefully it doesn't crash anything, I was literally just going to replace that background composition with the video and hide the background composition. And that will just vastly reduce the amount of effort it needs to RAM preview this stuff, because it's only RAM previewing a video as opposed to a collection of live shapes. That was it though, so don't worry too much about me forgetting that. Please don't be mad. All right, let's export this guy. One way to do it, to get a completely uncompressed version, is to go to Composition, Add to Render Queue, and then you've got your best settings and lossless already selected, and that will create an AVI if you're on PC or a MOV if you're on Mac. When I did this before, it was 10 gigabytes because it was entirely uncompressed. So what I actually recommend you do is to select your composition, which I'll just rename to main now, and go to Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder queue, and that will open up Adobe Media Encoder, which is a separate piece of software specifically for encoding videos, and in there we can encode directly to an MP4, so you won't lose any quality other than you would normally encoding to an MP4. So skipping that exporting to an AVI step doesn't really lose you any quality. So sometimes when you hit that and you open up Adobe Media Encoder automatically, it won't actually add it to the queue for a few seconds until it figures itself out. Just wait and be patient, basically. So you want to click on your preset option. It'll be blue there, and that will open up your dynamic link. Once that's resolved everything it needs to resolve, it will bring up all of your encoding options like so. I recommend H.264, which is your standard MP4 format, or HEVC, High Efficiency Video Codec H.265, which is basically the next step in H.264 encoding, where it has smaller file sizes but longer encoding times. Because I don't particularly care about file size, I'm going to choose H.264, I'm going to leave all the other settings by itself, and then we're just going to hit render. And once that has finished, we'll be able to check out exactly what it is we've done. One mistake I probably shouldn't have done is put this in 60 FPS, but I wanted to see what it looked like in animation. I wanted it to be really buttery smooth and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of people are creating things in 60 FPS these days, so I wanted to check out what that would look like. It would be probably fine in 30 FPS, which would also make your computer run a lot smoother when rendering this. So let's take a look at what this is like once it's finished, and that'll be the end of the course. Okay, and here it is, the finished product. This has been a whirlwind of a journey, so I really do appreciate you guys sticking around and helping me out with this one by watching and sharing and enjoying. If you can think of ways for me to improve these kind of long format videos, then please do let me know. Something that I'm trying out. I tried out when I first started the channel and then wanted to try out again now, so that I could cover more projects sort of in depth. If you're enjoying it, great. Let me know by liking and subscribing and ringing the bell and all that stuff. I hate saying it, but YouTube basically forces you to do so. So that really does help out the channel and make sure that I can do more of this stuff in the future. So really well done if you've got this far. I know this has been quite the endeavor. You deserve a massive pat on the back. So go away, have a cup of tea and look at your lovely new animation, and make sure as well to sort of tag me on social media and stuff. I mainly use Instagram with anything that you do create using this series, and it'll be really interesting to see what you guys come up with. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you for sticking with me this long, and I'll see you next time on another episode of TipTut.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.